Chapter 185. We still need to do some tests. This is a never-before-seen organism. We need to know what can work on it. Sushan looked at Rinpochian as if she was looking at a treasure. How long has this worm been in your body? 3 days, no more than 72 hours, Rinpochian replied. You still need to do some tests to see if there are any other conditions. As Sushan spoke, she called for someone to bring Rinpochian to do all kinds of tests. As for herself, she repeatedly read the report a few times before heading to the laboratory. What's the matter? I'm still lacking a little. After a while, Sun Qing came to her side. Although he didn't have much of an expression on his face, his tone showed that he was very unhappy. No one would be happy if they were interrupted halfway through their work. Take a look at this. A new discovery, a big discovery. Sushan passed the report to Sun Qing and went to the microscope to look at Rinpochian's blood sample. Sun Qing read the report and the photos from the beginning to the end. His facial expression started to change, and he looked surprised. What's this? Sun Qing asked anxiously. This is a new discovery. I mentioned it just now. It was found on the body of the major shareholder of our laboratory. The formula was also provided by him. I really don't know where he found these things. Sushan moved her gaze away from the microscope with an excited look on her face. As long as we can find a way to restrain this organism, we can at least solve a world-class terminal illness or even more. Leukemia, Sun Qing immediately said as his eyes started to shine. Nothing was more exciting than conquering a terminal illness. The World Health Organization listed motor neuron disease, ALS, cancer, AIDS, leukemia, and rheumatoid arthritis as the world's 5 most difficult diseases. Leukemia referred to immature white blood cells that were released into the blood and showed abnormalities. According to the current report, this kind of worm could devour white blood cells. There were other problems. For example, white blood cells were the first line of defense against microorganisms, pathogens, and acute suppurative bacteria. They were also the main barrier. When white blood cells were reduced, the human body would be very easy to be invaded. However, this was only a small problem in conquering leukemia. Compared to curing leukemia, this was a small problem. Sun Qing walked to Sushan's side and looked closely at the microscope. He happened to see a white blood cell being devoured. Where is he? Sun Qing asked after looking for a while. I'm doing other tests. He's really a lucky star, Sushan said with a smile on her face. Previously, the major shareholder named Rinpochian brought back the black mud cream that shocked the entire medical world. This time, he brought back these worms that lived in the blood. To the two of them, he was indeed a lucky star. For the rest of the day, Rinpochian did all kinds of tests in a laboratory. The only thing that made him feel gratified was that he finally had a meal at noon. He was fed meat porridge. One had to know that the Empress hadn't stopped for the past few days and only occasionally fed him some blood. After drinking this bowl of meat porridge, Rinpochian felt a lot more alive. However, he still couldn't exert any strength. He couldn't move at all. At most, he could move his fingers and turn his head. He couldn't even lift his arms. After tossing and turning for an entire day, Rinpochian couldn't help but ask at night, "How is it? Do you have any ideas?" "We need time," Sushan said directly. "What I lack is precisely time." Rinpochian looked straight at her and said, "Previously, I had an idea. Hemodialysis is to expel the molecules that are smaller than the size of the semi-permeable membrane, leaving the red blood cells and white blood cells in the body. If we think about it the other way around, then we can expel the red blood cells, white blood cells, and large proteins from the semi-permeable membrane, leaving the earworms behind. Although this can't cure the disease, it can reduce the number of earworms. However, in this case, all the equipment needs to be customized. It will take at least half a year before it can be used. Furthermore, it will cause great harm to the body. It's a pity that time is too tight, Sushan said as she looked at Rinpochian. She had casually named this worm because it was found in Rinpochian's body. Furthermore, the first word of Rinpochian's surname was R. When Rinpochian heard the last part, he was almost angered to death. "Why did you say so much?" "Now, we need to see how the worms react to various drugs and substances. This will require a certain amount of time. Now all the spare manpower in the laboratory has already been mobilized. How much time do you need? Ren Baqian asked with a sullen face. Luck is very important. Perhaps we will discover an effective drug tonight. Perhaps we will need to wait until tomorrow or half a month. Just now, we have already tested some of the things that we have on hand. Currently, we have yet to see the desired results, Su Shan said helplessly. In other words, I can only resign myself to fate, right? Ren Baqian felt depressed. After examining for so long, this was the only result. From a certain aspect, yes. I will pass the information on this our worm to my teacher and some famous experts to see if they have any good ideas, Su Shan said again. The Empress listened from the beginning to the end. Even though she did not understand most of it, she understood one thing. That was, the other party did not have any good ideas at the moment. Everything required more time, and the only thing that was lacking now was time. Since this was the case, there was no point in saying any more. The Empress carried Ren Baqian with one hand and walked out. Chen Qing frowned and hurriedly followed behind. Currently, he did not know what to do. Even though Su Shan and Sun Qing were not well known in the country, they were actually quite famous internationally. Even though Chen Qing did not see Sun Qing at this moment, he knew that Sun Qing had definitely read through all the information. At this moment, it seemed that Sun Qing similarly did not have any ideas. Now, it was up to Su Shan's teacher or other experts to come up with a solution. The Empress carried Ren Baqian with one hand. After entering the elevator, she saw that Ren Baqian's face was not looking good. She said, "We will get the antidote." Ren Baqian moved his lips. "It's too dangerous." Along the way, he had inquired about the antidote. Even though the Empress did not say much, he could tell that the 9 pavilions was located in the hinterland of Great Xia. Just this point alone made it very dangerous. He still did not know that the 9 pavilions was overseen by the 5th most powerful expert in the world, Feng Sanlu. His ranking was even higher than the Empress's. If he knew, it would not be too dangerous, but simply risking his life. Is there anyone in this world who can make me stay? The Empress's face was ice cold, and her eyes were filled with disdain. Chen Qing was shocked by the Empress's tone. This woman's confidence was simply terrifying. He did not know what kind of person could say such words. Also, what she said just now was true. What did she mean? Chen Qing would never have thought that she was talking about him. Chapter 186. It was a blatant counterattack that turned the tables around. My friends, if you have votes, please support me. Don't keep them. No matter what, I have to catch up to 6th place and keep it, right? Although others have already treated me as a salted fish should have some ideals, right? Therefore, I'll post a flyer asking for votes. Asking for votes, asking for votes. Important things must be repeated 3 times. Also, the activity page of the mobile app has doubled the number of votes. Everyone, don't be afraid of trouble. Click a few more times and help me catch up. 11. Finally, I'd like to thank my friends who have always supported me, whether it's through subscriptions, gifts, monthly votes, or recommendation votes. Chapter 187. Chen Qing wanted to make arrangements for the 2 of them, especially for someone to take care of Ren Baqian. However, Ren Baqian rejected his offer. After being sent back by Chen Qing, the Empress placed Ren Baqian on the sofa and sat at one side. The 2 of them did not speak. They sat there from evening until late at night, only eating some takeout. Zixiao, go back and rest. Ren Baqian spent the entire night sorting out his emotions. There was no point in thinking too much about this matter. He could only hope that there would be some progress on the other side, or that he could successfully obtain the antidote from Great Xia. The Empress did not reply. Instead, she switched on the television. "I want to watch television," the Empress said. Ren Baqian forced a smile on his face and asked, "What kind of place is the 9 pavilions?" "A gathering place for a bunch of lunatics," the Empress replied casually. "Is it very powerful?" Ren Baqian asked. "No one in this world can stop me." The Empress's tone was full of confidence in herself. Even though the Empress's tone was unyielding, Ren Baqian could still sense something from her words. "That's amazing. What if they don't give it to us? This emperor has spoken. If they dare to refuse, This emperor will kill them and bury them with you. Hee hee. This time, Rinpochian really laughed. This was indeed the Empress's usual style. Soon after, the two of them fell into silence again. Only the sound of a Qing dynasty drama on the television kept on drilling into Rinpochian's ears. I only hope that your heart is like mine, that you will not disappoint my longing for you. Once you have crossed the ocean, it is difficult for you to be like water. It is an unforgettable madness. It is difficult to say which one is better, the moon or the stars. If you don't lower your head and cry because you have missed the moon, maybe you will see the sky full of stars. It's not inferior to the beauty of the moon. However, at this point in time, Rinpochian was already immersed in his own thoughts. On the other hand, the Empress was watching with bright and piercing eyes. He was just an ordinary person, while Qi Zixiao was the emperor of a country. She was peerless in beauty and martial arts, but she could treat him like this. She brought him to the enemy's territory without rest for several days, facing a strong opponent and obtaining the antidote for him. Why did she do it? Was it because of all the lies he had said before? Or his value to Dayo? Or was it the last one, the love she had for him? Just like by Jingjing and Joker? This was the first and third point. The first was the cause, and the third was the effect. He was not blind, nor was he a fool. He could completely feel it. The second point wasn't important anymore. Just for the friendship that only existed in novels and movies, what was there to hesitate about? Was there anything he couldn't do? Hadn't he once thought that he would be willing to go against the entire world for her? Yes, even if I have to go against the whole world, I'm willing. Rinpochian repeated his previous thoughts. What could he do in his current state? Is there anything I can help with when the time comes? Apart from asking the other party not to go to Great Xia? Rinpochian thought about it. There seemed to be something that, even though it was very difficult to obtain, wasn't impossible. Furthermore, after obtaining it, regardless of whether the Empress was in the 9 pavilions or when she was intercepted by enemies when she left Great Xia, it would be extremely useful. Zixiao, can you bring me to the 2nd floor? I'm thinking of something that will be helpful to us, Rinpochian said with a look of determination in his eyes. If this matter were to be exposed in the future, he would be hunted down by the entire world, so he would have to run for his life. As for his parents and family, the worst-case scenario would be to be sent to that world. What is it? The Empress turned to look at him. Her eyebrows were gentle and her eyes were bright. Nerve gas. Just 1 kilogram is enough to kill all humans and animals within a radius of 1 kilometer. Rinpochian's gentle voice spoke of this terrifying thing. This was the determination he had just made. As long as you obtain this antidote, Zixiao, if you encounter any trouble, you can just throw it out. I'm sure the danger this time will be reduced by a lot. However, it will be somewhat difficult to obtain it. All right. The Empress didn't hesitate at all. She didn't feel that it was inappropriate for such a thing of mass destruction. She brought Rinpochian to the computer on the 2nd floor and sat him down. Rinpochian directed the computer to boot up, following which, the Empress placed Rinpochian's hands on the keyboard and held them as if she was hugging him. Rinpochian smelled the delicate fragrance from the Empress's body and felt her hair brushing against his face. His heart was at peace. He could feel the softness and warmth of the Empress's hands. There was a smile on Rinpochian's face. Even after this incident, he would become a global fugitive even if he neutralized the poison. The change from an ordinary person to a Kongbu member wouldn't affect his current mood. He felt warm and happy. What are you smiling at? The Empress asked coldly, but it was as if she was speaking beside Rinpochian's ear. Such an intimate action made her ears feel a little hot. When people are happy, they will smile. As long as you are by my side, I will be happy, Rinpochian said with a smile. What exactly do I have to do? Hurry up. The Empress's voice became even colder. The smile on Rinpochian's face became wider. However, business was more important. Rinpochian forced his fingers to move on the keyboard. Then, he let the Empress help him flip the pages. First, he confirmed the 2 most powerful poisonous gases, VX and sarin. Sarin's lethality was ranked below VX, but it was more in line with Rinpochian's requirements. The time it took to take effect was shorter, the effect was faster, and it directly acted on the nerves. Even if it didn't poison the other party to death, it would greatly reduce the other party's strength. It was completely in line with Rinpoche's requirements. Next, he continued to search for information on sarin gas. Very quickly, Rinpoche's attention was attracted by a piece of news from a few months ago. A certain organization's biochemical weapons factory was bombed by the United States. And a few months before that, that organization had just carried out an attack with sarin gas. This news was from a few months ago, but it was very useful to Rinpoche now. This was because in the previous attack, according to the symptoms of the casualties, it could be inferred that the other party used sarin gas. Although it was bombed a few months ago, Rinpoche felt that the possibility of sarin gas was very high. After all, they didn't use much sarin gas in the previous attack. It was very likely that they kept it in their hands as a deterrent. Furthermore, the difficulty of obtaining sarin gas here was much higher than going to the United States to try his luck. Although he could find the address of some of the bases on the internet, who knew where the sarin gas was stored unless he caught some military officials? After thinking about it, Rinpoche still felt that going to that organization was better than thinking of ways to deal with the United States. Although he had already made up his mind, it wasn't that easy to hide from the surveillance and satellites in the United States. Now that he had a better option, he naturally gave up on his previous dangerous idea. As for that notorious organization, so what if they found out who did it? Zixiao, we are going overseas to take a look. Maybe they have what we want, Rinpoche said as he tilted his head slightly. Okay. The Empress nodded without hesitation. The next thing to do was to find someone to apply for their passports. And their destination was Turkey. The situation in that country wasn't too stable recently. There were no domestic flights to that country. They needed to go to Turkey first and then change routes there. It was very easy to get a tourist visa for Turkey. They just had to apply online, and it could be obtained in a few minutes. The only troublesome thing was the passport. Fortunately, Chun Xin could still help with this matter. Although he didn't know why Rinpoche was still running around at this time, he already felt that he couldn't see through Rinpoche, who was originally just an ordinary person. Whether it was the things he did, the strange things, the poison, or the woman beside him. He hung up the phone. He would be able to get his passport tomorrow morning. It had to be said that it was really important to have a strong friend. Even if he couldn't do it himself, his connections were enough to help him solve some of the problems that he found very troublesome. Rinpoche calculated the time. After getting his passport tomorrow morning, he would directly go to the capital and then take a flight to Turkey. He would arrive at midnight tomorrow. Chapter 188. Late at night the next day, a man and a woman appeared at Istanbul airport. The man was carrying a bag, while the woman was wearing a red dress. The woman's hand was still on the man's back, and they looked like any other traveling couple. However, upon closer inspection, the man's body was completely limp and powerless. His legs were barely moving, and his toes were about 1 centimeter off the ground. He only looked like he was walking because the woman was holding him with one hand. Naturally, it was Rinpoche and the Empress who appeared here. They didn't leave after alighting the plane. Instead, they waited for a night and took a plane to Gaziantep the next morning. This was the closest Turkish city to the area occupied by that organization. After arriving at Gaziantep, they first ate some local specialties. Naturally, it was the Empress who ate. From time to time, she would feed Rinpoche a plate of food. Even though she wasn't as gentle as an ordinary woman, this kind of treatment made Rinpoche want nothing more. After eating, they bought some things from a nearby shop. Thanks to the voice translation software, Rinpoche and the Empress, who only knew basic English, didn't find it difficult to move in this unfamiliar place. After bringing food and water, the Empress held Rinpoche's hand and chose a direction. After leaving the city, they arrived at a hidden place and began to move quickly. At this moment, the Empress was even faster than the Kirin while carrying a person. Rinpoche only felt a strong gust of wind rushing into his mouth, making him unable to open his eyes. He felt that if a rope was tied to his body, he could fly like a kite. Of course, it was more likely that he would be dragged like a dead dog. After advancing at high speed for half an hour, they could already see a row of iron nets ahead. The Empress tapped her feet and directly leaped over. In the distance, a soldier inadvertently looked over and immediately rubbed his eyes in disbelief. When he opened his eyes again, that red shadow had already disappeared. "Jiansu, what are you doing?" Another soldier looked in the direction he was looking at. "Nothing. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me just now," the soldier called Jiansu said suspiciously. After another 10 minutes, the two of them, who had already left the border, stopped behind a mound of earth. The Empress took out her phone and pressed a few buttons, following which she brought up the GPS map. This was what Rinpochian taught her before they set off. Thanks to the current media, the area occupied by that organization could be found on the news. The organization controlled the central, eastern, and northern parts of the country. Every year, many young people from other countries would sneak into the organization from this direction after being brainwashed. After ascertaining the direction, the Empress carried Rinpochian and moved forward again. After more than an hour, both of them had already entered the territory controlled by that organization. They could already vaguely see the city in the distance. Suddenly, the Empress carried Rinpochian and hid behind a huge rock. A moment later, a few vehicles passed by on the dirt road, not far in front of the two of them. There was a pickup truck in front and behind them with machine guns mounted on them. There were 5 or 6 people in camouflage uniforms, bulletproof vests, and hoods sitting in the trucks. In the middle, there was a truck with many people on it. Rinpochian, who was being carried by the Empress, looked at the cars from afar and knew that they were indeed within the range of the target. Calculating the time, it was about time for the two of them to return to that world. After all, time was tight. It was best not to waste too much time this time. What's more, even if he managed to get some information now, if he couldn't retrieve it in time, it would take a long time for him to return, and he would have to search for more information again. The next time he came back, he would have at least 2.5 days, and it could even be extended depending on the situation. Furthermore, Rinpochian still had some hope for the laboratory. The next time he came back would be 5 days later in that world, which was 15 days on Earth. With such a long time, what if the laboratory had found a cure? Even though the probability wasn't high, there was always a chance. If that was the case, he wouldn't have to take the risk. At the thought of this, Rinpochian said, "Zixiao, let's go back first and come back next time." The Empress nodded and said, "Okay." Following the Empress's nod, the two of them disappeared into thin air in their attire and appeared at the place where they had left previously. The Kirin was lying on the ground with its belly facing the sky. It kept rubbing its back against the ground as if it was itching. The Kirin was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the two of them, following which it turned over, whimpered, and trotted to the side of the Empress. The Empress patted its head twice, leaped onto its back, and said, "Let's go." A few days later, within the borders of Great Xia, the mountains and forests were filled with fiery red leaves. From time to time, they drifted down with the autumn wind, forming a thick layer of leaves on the ground. Rinpochian was leaning on the Kirin's back. The Kirin had nothing better to do and was biting its claws, or maybe its nails. This Kirin was called Qi Shui. It was said that the first emperor found it beside a lake called Qi Shui and gave it this name. It had been in the palace of Dayo for 50 years. Even though its bloodline wasn't pure, its lifespan was far longer than that of an ordinary creature. It was said that it had at least 500 years of lifespan. At present, it could only be considered as an adult. At this moment, Rinpochian was sitting on the ground with a thick cloak wrapped around his body. This was brought back by the Empress after she went out once. Along the way, most of the time, they walked in remote places to reduce the chances of being discovered. After all, the Empress also knew the dangers of this trip. Occasionally, she would go down the mountain to obtain some things. The previous time was because the temperature had plummeted after entering Dayo. The Empress went down the mountain to obtain this cloak and a bowl of porridge from an unknown place. The next time was to go down the mountain to obtain some food. After all, Rinpochian couldn't survive just by drinking some beast blood. However, his current position wasn't very comfortable. It was fine at first, but after Qi Shui rubbed against his body, Rinpochian was now in an awkward position. Even though he couldn't move, He could feel the soreness in his arms, shoulders, and waist. At present, he was looking forward to the Empress's return. This position was really too uncomfortable. It would be better to lie flat on the ground. A series of rustling sounds could be heard. Rin Baqian immediately became alert and looked in that direction. Wild beasts. Just as this thought arose in Rin Baqian's mind, two men dressed in tight-fitting clothes appeared from behind the tree. Even though their bodies were stained with grass and with dust, looking at their clothes, they weren't ordinary hunters. When he saw them, they also saw him and the monster that he was leaning on. "This is Akiran," one of them said in surprise. "Sorry, we went the wrong way." The other person pulled him and walked backward. Rin Baqian watched the two of them disappear into the forest. His heart tightened. They had been seen by others, and he hoped that this news wouldn't spread. There were very few Kirans with impure blood in this world. The most well-known one was in the palace of Dayo. Unfortunately, he couldn't move at all. Even if he could move, he wouldn't be able to do anything to the two of them. Rin Baqian had absolute confidence in his martial arts. As for Qi Shui, it didn't even look at the two of them from the moment they appeared until they left. "Chengwu, why are you pulling me?" "That's Akiran." The two of them walked for more than 100 meters before the one who exclaimed about Akiran shook off the other person's arm and asked, "Can we provoke someone who is with Akiran? If they don't like us at all, we won't be able to leave the mountain alive today." "That's true. However, I didn't expect that we would see Akiran one day. When we go back, we will have something to brag about." Other than those occasional rumors, as far as I know, only the imperial family of Dayo has one. I don't know when another one appeared. Chengwu, do you think it's the one in the imperial family of Dayo?" the first man asked. "How is that possible?" The other man shook his head. "But this is a Kirin, not a cabbage. It can't just appear out of nowhere, right? Why aren't you walking?" "Wait, something isn't right." The eyes of the man called Chengwu lit up. "What's wrong?" There was something wrong with that person just now. His aura was too weak, and his posture was a little awkward. Chengwu recalled the man he saw just now and said, "What do you mean?" Chapter 189. That man may be seriously injured and unable to move. So what? The other man asked casually. Even if that man was seriously injured, what could the two of them do? Chengwu was a skinny man of about 30 years old. The lines on his face looked like they were chiseled by knives and axes. At this moment, he was hesitating. "Let's go back and take a look." After hesitating, Chengwu made up his mind. Upon hearing this, the man looked at Chengwu's expression and cried out, "Are you crazy?" Previously, Chengwu had pulled him away, and now he wanted to go back. Combined with what he said about that man not being able to move, it wasn't hard to imagine what he was up to. Chengwu's eyes flickered. "I'm just going back to take a look. If that man is really seriously injured, then only the Kirin is left. Since he can be associated with a Kirin, he might have some good stuff on him, like secret manuals or treasures. Don't you want them?" "You are crazy. There is still a Kirin." The other man was shocked. Chengwu had always given people the impression that he was bold but cautious, but no one expected him to be so bold. Didn't that Kirin have no reaction just now? Let's just watch from afar. What if that man is seriously injured and dies? If that's the case, we can just pick him up. That Kirin won't be guarding him forever, right? Chengwu voiced out his thoughts. "If he recovers, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape." The other man was a little worried. "Let's observe the situation first. Furthermore, if he doesn't die, we can use other methods to kill him. That is a Kirin, not a human, and it can't know everything like a human. I have an item with 3 bone-penetrating needles that can penetrate leather from 100 steps away. I'm afraid that even if that man dies, the Kirin won't know what happened." Chengwu continued. As he spoke, he took out a cylinder from his bag, waved it in front of the other man, and put it back into the bag. "You actually have this thing?" The other man was surprised to see what Chengwu took out. One had to know that this cylinder was only sold at the Pavilion of 100 Machines, and it was very expensive. It could fire a total of 3 rounds of bone-penetrating needles, 3 at a time. It could be said to be silent and extremely fast. Even an expert who had just attained the Earth Wheel level would inevitably be hit by it. Baisu gave it to me earlier. If she had used it to protect herself, I'm afraid she wouldn't have ended up like that, said Chung Wu, a haze flashing across his eyes. So, if there's a chance for me to become stronger, I must seize it. Otherwise, how can I avenge Bai Su? Chung Wu gritted his teeth and said. The other man could understand Chung Wu's feelings. No matter who it was, if their beloved junior sister was tortured to death, the only thing left in their hearts would be revenge. It wasn't easy for Chung Wu to endure until now. However, according to what Chung Wu said, it was somewhat feasible. If that man had died, the Qilin would definitely not have stayed there to guard him. The two of them just had to guard that place and prevent others from stealing the peaches. If he just stood guard from afar, it shouldn't be too dangerous. Thinking of this, he also nodded. I'll go with you. But first, don't be rash. Let's observe the situation first. Chung Wu revealed a trace of a smile and patted his companion's shoulder. In his heart, however, he said, I'm sorry. I haven't gotten my revenge yet, so I can't die yet. The reason why he had to convince his companions was because of that Qilin. No one knew what kind of strength this legendary species had. If there really was an accident, he would have a slight chance. After all, he ran faster than him. The two of them made up their minds and didn't rush back. Instead, they first changed direction and carefully moved toward the place they had been before. Although the two of them only took a glance and were in a hurry to leave, Chung Wu noticed another distance. The trees were closer to that person, which meant that the two of them could move closer. More importantly, that person was facing in another direction. The two of them made a circle before carefully moving in that direction, trying not to make the slightest sound. When they were about to get close to the place they had been before, the two of them could see through the trees and the empty space from before. The two of them carefully looked over and saw that the Qilin and the man were there, but there was also another person beside them. It was a woman in red, wearing a somewhat strange red dress. She was squatting there and feeding something into the man's mouth. So, there's a companion. The two of them thought. In the next second, the woman suddenly raised her head and looked over with a cold expression. Although they were far away, the two of them could still feel the murderous and mocking intent in her eyes. We have been discovered. Run. The two of them turned around and fled. With just a glance from the woman, the two of them felt a chill run down their spines. It was as if their bodies had been poured with ice water. They immediately knew that she was an expert, and she was probably much more skilled than their chief. The Empress put down the bowl in her hand. Her movements were neither hurried nor slow. In the next moment, she suddenly disappeared and appeared not far behind the two of them. In a flash, she appeared above the two of them and directly stepped on one of their heads. That person almost didn't have time to react and was directly stomped into the ground like a nail. Only his hair was left on the ground, and he was directly stomped to death. Chung Wu was only a few meters faster than the man. When he heard the sound behind him, he turned around and saw that his fellow disciple only had his hair scattered on the ground. The woman was standing on his head and looking at him. Her face was full of heroic spirit, but it was as cold as frost. Subconsciously, he took out the cylinder. However, the combination of this frosty woman, the red dress, and the Qilin from before suddenly reminded him of that legendary figure. How could that person appear here? But other than her, who else could it be? At this moment, Chung Wu's mind was blank. At this moment, his previous thoughts seemed like a joke. But why was she here? How could she be here? I can't accept this. In the next second, a stone flew out from under the woman's feet. With a piercing sound, it directly hit Chung Wu's head. It pierced through the other side of Chung Wu's head with fresh blood and brain matter, taking away all of his thoughts. Chung Wu's body ran a step before falling to the ground. At this moment, there was only an empty hole in his face and blood splattered everywhere. Less than a minute had passed since the Empress disappeared and returned. What's wrong? Rinpoche couldn't move his body, but he could still hear the sound of something running in the forest just now. This made him subconsciously think of the two people he saw just now. Just two little bugs, the Empress said indifferently. Hearing the Empress say, two, Rinpoche knew that it was most likely those two people. They actually left and came back. He reckoned that they were up to no good. They deserved to die. In fact, after the Empress returned, Rinpochian told her about the two people who came just now. Obviously, the Empress didn't care. As long as the other party didn't appear in front of her, she couldn't be bothered with them. The Empress squatted down, picked up the bowl, and fed Rinpochian the remaining half of the porridge. Then, she lifted him up and placed him on the back of the Qilin before continuing on their journey. One day later, the two of them returned to Earth in a forest that was 1 day's journey away from the 9 pavilions. At this moment, Rinpochian had already been poisoned for 9.5 days. There were still 5.5 days left. When Rinpochian and the Empress appeared in the other world, both of them were stunned because there were two men wearing hoods beside them. At this moment, the middle part of the hood was pulled down to reveal their faces. They were lifting their pants and looked like they were about to go to the toilet. Chapter 190. The four of them stared at each other for a moment. Rinpochian's face was filled with confusion. Was there really such a coincidence? In the next moment, the two of them flew backward without even making a sound and remained motionless in the air. Previously, the two of them disappeared behind a huge rock near the road leading out of the city. There were still 3 cars on the road, 2 modified pickup trucks, and 1 military transport vehicle. At this moment, there was a row of men wearing camouflage uniforms and headgear peeing at the roadside. Furthermore, they were laughing at the two of them for being like sissies who had to hide from people when going to the toilet. In the next moment, they saw the two of them flying backward from behind a rock. Everyone was stunned at first, following which someone shouted loudly. Everyone hurriedly pulled up their pants, took out their guns, and pointed them at the rock while cursing incessantly. At this moment, the Empress's face was as cold as ice. Actually, she didn't know what the two of them were going to do. After all, no one dared to do such a thing in front of her. It was just that the moment she came out, she met the two of them. Her mood immediately turned sour, and her face was filled with unhappiness. Listening to the clamor outside in a language that she didn't understand, she carried Rinpochian with one hand and turned out of the rock. There were more than 20 people opposite them with their guns aimed at them and shouting in a language that neither of them understood. Perhaps they felt that it was unnecessary. No one went to operate the squad machine gun on the pickup truck. After all, there were only 2 of them. The 2 of them were less than 20 meters away from the roadside. At this moment, both parties could almost see each other's faces. In an instant, the Empress disappeared from her original position. Before anyone could react, she had already appeared above the head of the person in front and stomped down. However, unlike the previous person who was nailed into the ground like a nail, the Empress stomped his entire head into his chest. Using the force of this stomp, she stomped on another person's head as if she was stepping on a human head. In just 2 seconds, a total of 9 people fell to the ground after their bodies became shorter. Their bones were protruding from their backs. Those people only saw a red figure carrying another person and shuttling through the crowd at a speed that they couldn't react to. One by one, the living people fell to the ground with the sound of their bones breaking. Immediately, fear rose in their hearts. They screamed and raised their guns to shoot randomly in the air. Their guns simply couldn't keep up with the Empress's figure. But in the next second, the red shadow fell into the crowd like a ghost and kept shuttling back and forth, sending people flying. From the beginning to the end, everyone could only see 2 shadows flying up and down. The battle lasted for less than 10 seconds. All the gunfire stopped abruptly. When the Empress stopped, she was surrounded by corpses. Half of them had their bones shattered and their internal organs ruptured. Half of them had their heads in their chests and their spines protruded from their backs. Rinpochian had truly experienced a hail of bullets, but not a single bullet was able to graze him. In that kind of situation, just now, he didn't feel the slightest bit of unease. He firmly believed in the Empress's strength. There might be someone else in the car, Rinpochian reminded. As soon as Rinpochian finished speaking, the doors of the 2 cars opened. Da-da-da. A gunshot followed the opening of the car door. There was a total of 3 people. Their faces were full of fear, as if they had seen the devil. They shouted and hooked their fingers on the trigger. The Empress carried Rinpochian and moved horizontally for 2 to 3 meters. Then, she leaped up and stepped on the head of one person, followed by the other. Now, there was only one person hiding behind the car door, with a fearful look on his face as he turned his gun. The Empress suddenly stretched out her hand and waved it in the air a few times. There were already a few bullets in her hand. Then, with a wave of her hand, a few holes immediately appeared in the car's window. That person was still hooking the trigger and shouting crazily. He didn't even realize that there were no more bullets in his gun. At the same time, liquid flowed down his pants. That person still felt that he was in a dream. He must be in a dream. Otherwise, how could such a thing happen in this world? If he was in a dream, then it could be explained. These two people must be demons. It was a dream to make him submit. The Empress's movements were too fast. Rinpoche and that person didn't realize that the Empress had actually caught a few bullets and threw them back. Furthermore, she threw them askew. She threw them askew. She threw them askew. With a cold look on her face, the Empress instantly appeared in front of the open car door and gave it a kick. Boom! The car door was deformed and twisted. Then, with a huge force, it crashed into the person behind. That person's legs and head, which were over the height of the car door, remained in place. His body was spurting blood as he crashed into the car and flew out along with the other car door. Only then did the Empress carry Rinpoche and leave quickly with a gloomy face. Rinpoche was a little speechless. The last person died a little too tragically. The Empress purposely chose a place to avoid people. Not long after, they arrived near the city that they had seen before. At this moment, the two of them only realized the problem with this city when they got closer. It didn't look like the flourishing buildings of China at all. Close to the two of them was a stretch of single-story houses with broken walls. Many of the buildings were dilapidated, and only one or two walls were still standing. There were bullet holes and traces of explosions everywhere. There were also some buildings in the distance, but they couldn't be seen very clearly. At present, what the two of them saw was a stretch of ruins that was filled with a heavy aura of death. However, they still had to go to the city to find out the specifics. The Empress carried Rinpoche and leaped up and landed on the roof of a house. Occasionally, she would stop on some of the taller buildings and look for the direction to go. At this moment, the two of them realized that there were still many people in the city. Most of them were soldiers who wore camouflage and headgear. There were also a small number of civilians. Some of them wandered on the streets and hurriedly avoided the soldiers when they saw them. There were also a few people who gathered together and shouted in a language that they couldn't understand. There were also some youths who waved their arms fanatically when they saw those soldiers. The two of them stopped on the roof of a nearby building. The Empress said, "What do we do next? Catch someone to talk to and come back. I reckon that the thing we want isn't here. Ask them where the most important city is and where the leader is. It's best to find those soldiers who look different from the majority. As far as I know, there are many brainwashed youths who came from other places. They might not be that fanatical, and it's easier for them to get the information we want to know," Rinpoche said. "Just leave me here. There shouldn't be any danger." The Empress nodded her head. She placed Rinpoche against the wall and leaped down from the roof. "Nasha, coming here is the right choice." Two Caucasian girls in military uniforms were smoking in a shady place. "Yes, I like it here. I'm fighting with everyone for a noble goal. It's so much better than the boring days in the past. This place has allowed me to know the meaning of living," the other girl with freckles said with a smile. Both of them were around 20 years old. They gave up their comfortable and peaceful lives and secretly left their homes to come here. It had already been half a year since then, and they had already started to get used to life here. Here, both of them had found what they wanted. Even if they were to die in battle here, it would be for the sake of a noble goal. Therefore, they weren't afraid of death. At this moment, a person appeared in front of them. It was a stunning lady wearing a red dress. She didn't look like someone who should be here at all. Instead, she looked like someone who should appear on television or at banquets. However, the two of them weren't concerned about this. Instead, they were concerned about how this person appeared. No matter who it was, they would be shocked when someone suddenly appeared in front of them out of thin air. Their heartbeat would accelerate. It was the same for the two of them. At the same time, they opened their mouths wide and wanted to scream. The Empress slapped one of them on the forehead. The back of his head hit the wall heavily and blood splattered everywhere. At the same time, she grabbed the other person by the neck and disappeared. After a while, someone found a female soldier lying on the ground. Her eyes were wide open. She had long lost her breath. Immediately, someone shouted a warning. Chapter 191. I'll make up for it tomorrow after attending the wedding. Actually, I've always wanted to discuss something. What if I don't update for a day and then release it at noon the next day? Chapter 192. Nasha used to think that she had lofty ideals. In order to protect absolute justice, she came here from her hometown and was prepared. However, at this moment, she was trembling. It wasn't only because of the pain in her left arm, but also because of the fear in her heart. At this moment, there were two people in front of her. One was a man leaning against the corner of the wall, and the other was the woman who looked stunning at first glance. After being brought here in an unimaginable way and having one of her arms broken, her heart was filled with fear. If they were soldiers from the government, she probably wouldn't be like this. However, that woman in red was actually able to carry her and leap 7 to 8 meters high. Her speed was as fast as lightning. This made her extremely afraid. She wasn't human at all. She was a devil in human skin. Rinpoche had a kind smile on his face and said in a gentle voice, "Be good and tell us what we want to know. Then, you won't have to suffer like this anymore. What we want to know is very simple. Even if you don't say it, others will say it. Why must you stubbornly make things difficult for yourself?" The voice translation software on the Empress's phone translated Rinpoche's words. Fortunately, he brought a solar charger with him the last time he set off. When he was in the other world, he hung the charger outside his backpack so that he could charge his phone. Nasha understood the man's words. After hesitating for 10 seconds, she felt a sharp pain in her right arm. The pain of her broken bones made her see black. Then, that hand moved to her neck. "If you don't say it, we can only look for the next person. This isn't difficult for us. There will always be someone who will say it." Rinpoche continued to speak gently. Nasha's heart was filled with fear. She cried hysterically, "What do you want to ask? I will tell you everything. Let me go. Please let me go." No matter what, she was only a young woman in her 20s. Even though she came here with good intentions and had undergone preliminary training, she was still a young woman who hadn't experienced much. "Okay, that's good. Speak slowly," Rinpoche said softly, following which he got to know some of the things he wanted to know during the question and answer session. In fact, this girl didn't know much. It was impossible for her to know too many things, such as where the sarin gas was or where the leader of the organization was. However, this gave Rinpoche a sense of direction. He knew the location of the so-called capital of this organization. It was about a day's journey from here. With the Empress's speed, it would take her at most half a day. The higher-ups of the organization must be there. Even the head of the organization must be there. Perhaps he could get what he wanted. After knowing what he wanted, Rinpoche felt a little regretful and said gently, "It's good to have ideals, but it's a pity that this world is very cruel." He looked up at the Empress and said, "Send her on her way." Before Nasha could react, the Empress placed a finger on her forehead and threw her corpse to the ground. Then, she picked up Rinpoche and left quickly. Occasionally, someone would see a red shadow flash through the window, or they would see something jump between two buildings when they looked up. When they tried to look for it again, it was already gone. The scene just now was like an illusion. After leaving this place, Rinpoche gave Chunqing a call to inquire about the progress of the laboratory. It would be best if they could find the antidote. Unfortunately, even though Su Shan had sought help from her teacher, the progress was still unsatisfactory. Rinpoche hung up the phone. It seemed like he had to continue down this path. After the two of them left, even though the entire city's army searched wantonly, they couldn't find anything. They only found the corpse on the rooftop more than an hour later. At that time, the two of them were already very far away from the city. Not long after, the convoy outside the city was also discovered. Everyone who saw it was shocked by the scene. 20 to 30 people were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. Half of them had their heads in their chests, and their spines protruded out from their backs. Everyone had no idea how this was done. On the other hand, everyone found some traces on the bodies of some people. Shoe prints. Those people who were still in good condition had a shoe print on their bodies. These people were kicked to death by someone? How could this be possible? So many people didn't even have the ability to resist. Even though there were some bullet marks in the surroundings, there weren't any bullet holes on the bodies of the deceased. There were only two ways to die. The first way was that their heads were in their chests, as if they were smashed by someone. The second way was that their internal organs were smashed, and there was a shoe print on their bodies. Furthermore, the shoe print wasn't big and seemed to belong to a woman. Lastly, there was one person who was different from the rest. His head and legs were outside the completely deformed right car door. His body and the left car door were not far away. This method of death was completely incomprehensible to everyone. Finally, someone speculated that this person was standing behind car door. The car door was smashed back by a huge force, which could be seen from the degree of deformation of the car door. After the car door smashed onto the person's body, due to the huge force and the fact that the person was standing behind the car door, the part of his body that was outside the car door was crushed by the car door, roof, and bottom. His body flew out along with the other car door. Judging from the scene, this seemed to be the only plausible scenario, but it was also the most impossible. In any case, dozens of people died in a convoy. It seemed like the murderer only had 2 or 3 people, yet he was able to kill them all empty-handed. This was what the scene conveyed to everyone. Everyone was puzzled and panicked because this was impossible. Even the best soldier couldn't do this. Half a day later, the Empress brought Rinpoche to the outskirts of another city. This was LK City, the capital of that organization. Even though it was also very run down, it was much more prosperous. There were also more cars coming and going. It took them some time to enter the city. Their hiding place was still on the rooftop. After all, the Empress's skills allowed her to walk in the forest of tall buildings as if she was walking on flat ground. It was also not that easy to be discovered. Both of them stood behind the parapet of a building and looked down. There were many people here, unlike the previous city that was in ruins. Other than the streets full of soldiers and very few civilians, it was like a normal city. The only difference between this city and other cities was that the air was filled with fanaticism. Zixiao, be careful. It's very dangerous here. Even though some people with guns can't cause any harm to you, if it's an army, it will still be dangerous for you. The weapons in this world aren't those that you see. There are also cannons, bombs, and other weapons that are very destructive. We are not here to do anything. We just want to obtain some things, Rinpoche exhorted. Even though he knew that this city shouldn't be a threat to the Empress, she still had too little understanding of the weapons in this world. Rinpoche didn't want her to get hurt because of her carelessness. At this time, the sky had already started to darken. The Empress gave Rinpoche some water, hid him, and disappeared into the night. 3 hours later, there were already 5 corpses not far away from Rinpoche. The Empress's operation was very smooth. She specifically picked the people who seemed to have a high status in the big house to capture. Among these 5 people, 2 of them were officials of this city. However, they didn't give Rinpoche the information that he wanted. Listening to the clamor from afar and the sound of the vehicles moving in the city, Rinpoche felt that someone might have already discovered that something was wrong. After all, capturing 5 people wasn't like capturing 5 chickens. It wasn't time to rest yet, and they weren't necessarily alone. In that case, the corpses of the people who had been disposed of should have been discovered. Rinpoche thought that since the Empress was back, she would probably be preparing to change her location. Before Rinpoche could wait for the Empress, a group of fully armed soldiers rushed up the building. They kicked open the rooftop door and dispersed. Very quickly, they discovered the corpses that weren't deliberately hidden in Rinpoche, who was hiding in a corner. When he heard the sound of the rooftop door being kicked open and the hurried footsteps, Rinpoche closed his eyes and tilted his head, pretending to be unconscious. At the same time, he shouted in his heart, "Your Majesty, if you don't come back soon, you won't be able to see me again." Pretending to be unconscious was indeed the most suitable action that he could do now. Even though his clothes and appearance were different from the ones here, and a few muzzles were immediately aimed at him. Pretending to be unconscious could more or less buy him some time and reduce the number of beatings. Chapter 193. A few soldiers pointed their guns at Renbachien. Then, one of them came to the back and said something to them. Then, he said something into the walkie-talkie. One of the soldiers quickly came to Renbachien and poked him with his gun. Seeing that Renbachien didn't respond, he gestured to the back. After being poked by the gun, Renbachien could barely keep his body still. To be honest, pretending to be unconscious wasn't an easy thing to do, especially under such circumstances where he couldn't move or open his eyes to look at his surroundings. He had no idea what was going on outside and could only pray that the Empress would come back soon. Otherwise, if something happened, he would be wronged. At this moment, there were 5 to 6 guns pointed at Renbachien on the rooftop. A few of them were checking the corpses while the rest of the people came over after searching the area. 2 of them had already picked Renbachien up and were ready to drag him back for interrogation. At this moment, a red figure carrying a person appeared in a corner. After seeing the soldiers on the rooftop, she was immediately alarmed. Could that person be in trouble? At the thought of this, she panicked a little. Without any time to think, she appeared outside the crowd in a flash. Before the 4 soldiers with guns could react, they were hit by a strong force. The moment they were hit, their bones were shattered and their internal organs were smashed. Without any sound, they were sent flying from the rooftop. Although the sound of flesh being hit could be heard and the guns falling to the ground, a few more people were sent flying before that happened. Even though the remaining people realized something was wrong, by the time they turned around, half of them had already turned into corpses. When the people on the rooftop saw the corpses falling from the sky like dumplings, they immediately cried out in alarm. When the person in the Empress's hands saw the soldiers on the rooftop, he was pleasantly surprised. However, after the Empress's ghost-like figure shuttled through the crowd, that person swayed for a while and saw his surroundings clearly. The soldiers on the rooftop were all gone. This caused him to widen his eyes and open his mouth wide, but he couldn't say anything. "I'm late," the Empress said while holding Renbachien with one hand. Her tone carried a tinge of guilt and concern. Renbachien opened his eyes and looked at the Empress. He smiled and said, "You're not late, you're just in time." When he heard a few short panic sounds just now, he calmed down. When the 2 people beside him suddenly let go of him and let him fall to the ground, he didn't panic at all. In fact, he was really fine. Fortunately, the Empress came back quickly. Those people wanted to bring him back and didn't do anything to him. However, he still praised himself for being smart and quick-witted just now. "Let's change places. We've been discovered," Renbachien said. After Renbachien said this, the Empress carried Renbachien and the man she caught and left quickly. Within a short period of time, they arrived at a secluded corner at the edge of the city. The Empress put Renbachien down. The person she was strangling with her other hand had almost stopped breathing. After she released her hand, he lay on the ground and kept coughing. "Ow!" Renbachien looked at this person's face with a light, and suddenly he remembered. Ren of the people. If it was that person, then the Empress had really made a great contribution this time. At the very least, the world should award her a Nobel Peace Prize. Ren, Chien Ren, Liov, of, Ren. Renbachien used his finger that could still move to search on the screen. Very quickly, a picture of a person giving a speech appeared. Renbachien laughed when he saw the bearded man in a black robe, black hat, and black beard gasping for breath on the ground. He didn't know what to say. Was it the will of the heavens, or was he just too lucky? Inexplicably, he thought of the saying that fortune and misfortune depend on each other. "How did you catch him?" Renbachien smiled and looked at the Empress. His voice was cheerful. "I saw a lot of people surrounding him as he walked out of the house. If I could move at this moment, I would definitely give you a thumbs up. You did a great job," Renbachien said happily. When the Empress heard his praise, she didn't express any opinion, but felt a little happy in her heart. "BGD, right?" Renbachien was all smiles as he looked at the man in the black robe. That man trembled when he heard the voice. He looked at the Empress with fear. In just a short period of time, he had already witnessed the strength of this woman. It wasn't something that a human could possess. He even suspected that the gods were here to punish them. Who are you? BGD forced himself to calm down and asked in English. However, he was barely able to calm down. After hearing his question, Rinpoche asked the Empress to turn on the voice translation and said, "You don't need to know who we are. We only want one thing, sarin gas. Do you have it? What do you want? It has nothing to do with you. Let's go after we get the sarin gas and the antidote. Otherwise, you will die. That thing is of no value to you if you don't use it. Furthermore, you can get it from other sources. I think it's not as important as your life. Also, I can assure you that I won't use that thing on you," Rinpoche added after thinking for a while. "I don't know who you are. How can I trust you?" BGD's eyes were filled with doubt. After saying a few words, he calmed down a lot. As long as they could talk, there would be a chance. After all, as the leader of such an organization, he wasn't someone who would be easily frightened. "Even though it's very old-fashioned, I have to say that you have no choice. After killing you, we can continue our search. You have seen her skills. No one can stop her, not even your army. If you die because of this, it won't be of any value. Furthermore, I'm afraid that your ideals will be dragged into an internal power struggle because of your death. You should know this better than me." Rinpoche threatened and tempted. He believed that the sarin gas wasn't as important as his life to BGD. Given BGD's status, he wouldn't care where the sarin gas ended up. "I can promise you, but you have to promise me that you won't hurt me." Just like what Rinpoche thought, BGD didn't care about the sarin gas at all. "Deal. So, where do you keep the sarin gas?" Rinpoche laughed. "It's in the underground base. It's very dangerous. You can follow me to get it." BGD's eyes flickered. Rinpoche looked at him and said word by word, "I think you are lying to us. Perhaps you should know what kind of treatment you will receive if you don't behave." In the next second, BGD hugged his leg and screamed in pain. His calf was broken from the stomp. "This time, I'm just reminding you not to do anything stupid. You have to remember that you have thousands of lives under your command. It's not worth it if you lose your life for something as insignificant as sarin gas. I know what I should do. You don't have to do this. I'm not lying to you." BGD's face was full of pain, and he was sweating profusely. "I just don't want you to do anything stupid. You have to know that you can continue to be your leader after we leave. Otherwise, you will become a corpse," Rinpoche repeated. Actually, he wasn't as confident as he appeared. After all, BGD was a person who had thousands of soldiers under his command and controlled the lives of many people. He didn't understand BGD and had no experience in dealing with him. He could only bare his fangs to scare BGD and make him behave. After that, the Empress carried BGD in his backpack and left. Rinpoche was still hiding in a corner and waiting quietly. There were many vehicles and people shouting around him. It seemed like a large number of troops were searching for something in the city. He knew that this was an inevitable reaction after BGD went missing. His current location should be relatively safe, and they wouldn't be able to find him in a short period of time. Half an hour later, the Empress suddenly landed on top of him. The backpack in her hand was already bulging, and it was filled with items. In her other hand, she was carrying a black cloth bag that looked like the BGD's robe that she had tied up. "Is this it?" the Empress asked as she took out a black bottle that was the size of a can. Looking at the size of the bottle and the bulging of the backpack, there were at least 20 to 30 bottles in it. The black cloth bag also contained about the same amount of bottles. "Try it and you will know," Rinpoche said. He felt that he was becoming more and more indifferent and didn't care about human lives anymore. A moment later, a group of armed soldiers was looking for something on the street. Suddenly, a bottle flew out of the darkness and landed at their feet. Everyone immediately raised their guns and searched around while shouting and cursing. In less than a minute, a few people at the spot where the bottle landed fell to the ground with their hands covering their necks. In less than 3 minutes, all of them collapsed. Rinpoche, who was far away, disappeared into the night after witnessing this scene. "That person is still alive. Since I said that I would spare his life, I naturally won't go back on my words," the Empress said. She didn't want to do such a thing. Rinpoche nodded his head. He didn't object to the Empress's actions. The world was so big, How could BGD find him? Chapter 194. Both of them thought that after they left, there would definitely be a huge wave of searches and a huge storm. In fact, there wasn't any. After BGD was brought back, he suppressed this matter. Previously, when he heard the news of a convoy being wiped out in another city, he immediately knew who the culprit was. He couldn't imagine that a human could actually reach such a level, but he saw it with his own eyes. Therefore, after some consideration, he suppressed this matter. On one hand, it would cause panic. On the other hand, it would affect his position. On the other hand, he was afraid of retaliation. However, after experiencing this incident, he became even more devout in his beliefs. Since such a powerful human was hidden in this world, the existence of God was inevitable. The two of them didn't know what would happen to BGD after they left and couldn't be bothered to care. Before daybreak, they crossed the border of Turkey and returned to Gaziantep. They found a random rooftop and stayed there. The nights here weren't cold. Although he didn't know the specifics, Rinpochian felt that even the Empress should be tired by now. Both bags were placed at one side. Rinpochian leaned against the corner of the wall. From here, he could see the Empress standing on the rooftop, overlooking the dark city and the occasional bright light. The night wind blew her hair and skirt up. Rinpochian liked watching the Empress like this more and more. Even if he could only see her back view, even if she couldn't move, he still felt happy. All the way until daybreak, the two of them went down to have breakfast. After that, they brought back some soft packaging film and carefully wrapped the bottles one by one. Although they had obtained the custom-made antidote made from nightshade and diphosphoryl, there was still a certain degree of danger if they were to use it after being poisoned. After all, the antidote needed time to take effect. Looking at the Empress who was wrapping the bottles with the soft packaging film, Rinpochian felt that the Empress might have done a lot of things that she had never done in her entire life. For example, taking care of people, feeding people, and doing such chores. These were things that the Empress would never experience. Now, she did all these things without any complaints. The cold expression on her face was just her character. "The dress is dirty," Rinpochian suddenly said. Rinpochian suddenly opened his mouth and said, the Empress's dress was indeed a little dirty. These few days, she had been wearing the dress that he bought for her at HN. After so many days of running around, even if she was very careful, her red dress would still have some dust on it. There were also stains on the hem of her dress and a few other places. Upon hearing this, the Empress didn't pay any attention to him. She merely brushed the dirty corner of her skirt to the back. Although it couldn't be seen anymore, there was still some dust on her body. Rinpochian laughed after seeing her actions, which made her somewhat annoyed. "After I recover, I will go buy a dress with you." Rinpochian continued to speak gently. Unlike when he was talking to Nasha, Rinpochian wasn't gentle on the surface but cold on the inside, which made the Empress dislike him. Instead, he was full of sincerity and intimacy. "All right," the Empress replied without raising her head. 2.5 days later, the two of them directly returned to the other world. At this moment, there were still 3 days left before the 15th day. When the two of them were only an hour away from the 9 pavilions, the Empress stopped Chi Shui at the top of the mountain. She placed Rinpochian aside and went into the forest in a flash. After a while, she returned to her white inner garment and red muslin skirt. With her status, she couldn't possibly let others look down on her dirty appearance. "Wait for me here. I'll be back in a while." The Empress carried the black bag in her hands. She had some understanding of the might of this thing, and this bag should be enough. "I actually want to see what kind of expression those people will have when they see you. I want to see the heroic bearing of a top-notch expert. I believe that will definitely be the most moving scene in this world, a scene that will be engraved in my heart for the rest of my life. However, I still won't be a burden to you now," Rinpochian said with a smile. A faint smile appeared on the Empress's face. It was very faint, but very beautiful. It was a scene that not many people in this world could see. "I will be back in a while. Chi Shui, protect him. If you really can't do it, it is still your own safety that is more important. Don't be too stubborn. You are much more important than me. maybe even 100 times more important. I don't want to see you get hurt. Ren Baqian solemnly said what he had always wanted to say, even though he clearly knew what would await him if that happened. This was the most sincere sentence he had ever said in his entire life. No one could stop me. The Empress looked at him with bright eyes and said. She patted Qi Shui's head, and in a flash, she leaped down from the mountain peak. That indomitable figure remained on Ren Baqian's retina, deeply imprinted in his mind, and occupied everything. The 9 pavilions had already been famous since the founding of Great Xia, and it had been at least 400 years since then. If one were to mention the 9 pavilions, other than their crazy style, there would be many experts. It wasn't far from the truth to say that experts were like carps crossing the river. The 9 pavilions had a great reputation. In the past few hundred years, there were at least 4 people who ranked among the top 10 experts in the world. Just this point alone made people not dare to look down on them. However, the 9 pavilions was so big, and there weren't many people who truly understood them. After all, most people didn't like to deal with that bunch of lunatics. The 9 pavilions was located in a kernel. It would be more appropriate to say that it was a very large village. The entire village had at least 1,000 households, and they were distributed throughout the kernel. Everything in the village was in good order. The disciples of the 9 pavilions, who were regarded as vicious by outsiders, were like ordinary people in this village, chatting and laughing. In the village, there were people who sold meat, fruits, rice, noodles, salt, and iron. It was no different from any other village in this world. The only difference was the 9 tall pagodas located at the back of the village, which attracted some people's attention. Many people would subconsciously glance at the pagodas while walking with respectful expressions on their faces. If an outsider were to see this situation, his or her jaw would drop. They really couldn't figure out how this bunch of lunatics, who called you brothers a moment ago, and then killed your entire family the next moment, could live like ordinary people in this village. It was even more unimaginable that this bunch of 9 pavilions disciples, who were feared everywhere, could actually live like a group of villagers. There were no guards in the 9 pavilions. After all, many of the people here could be considered experts in their own right. There were at least 100 earthwheel experts and countless manwheel experts. If a stone was thrown out, it might even hit an earthwheel expert who looked like an old farmer. No one dared to behave atrociously in such a place, not even the people from the 9 pavilions. However, today, there was someone who dared to behave atrociously here. There was a gate archway at the entrance of the village that was about 4 to 5 meters tall. After hundreds of years of wind and rain, this archway was already modeled. On the archway, there were 3 big words, 9 pavilions, written with an iron brush and silver hook. The words revealed a trace of saber intent. It was said that these words were left behind by the chief pavilion master who established the 9 pavilions. The words contained his understanding of saber techniques. Therefore, there were often people observing and practicing under this archway. At this moment, it was the same. A total of 20 to 30 people were sitting 10 meters away from the archway and looking up. Each of them had a look of concentration on their faces. At this moment, a lady dressed in red, carrying a strange backpack, suddenly appeared on the archway. She stepped on the archway and overlooked the entire village. Hua Sanlu, come out. Chapter 195. Hua Sanlu, come out. A woman in red stood on top of the archway. Her cold voice reached everyone's ears, and everyone looked over in shock. Hua Sanlu was the grand pavilion master of the 9 pavilions. He was also the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Even the royal family of Great Xia treated him with respect and addressed him as Mr. Hua. When had he ever been yelled at like this before? Following which, the crowd erupted. Regardless of whether it was the old farmers walking on the street vendors, the shop owners, or the gorgeously dressed lady boss, all of them rushed out. It was as if countless locusts were leaping up from the streets. One by one, they leaped onto the roofs. The scene was spectacular. Following which, they saw a woman in red standing on top of the archway that everyone treasured. Everyone started cursing. Some of them even tore off their peaceful facade and bare their fangs. Who's that? How dare you? Come down and beg for forgiveness. Get lost. A man thrust his sword at the woman in red on top of the archway. That strike was filled with a cold glint. Many people recognized this man. He was at the middle level of the earth wheel level and was considered pretty strong in the 9 pavilions. Most importantly, he was very young. He was only 22 years old and was likely to become a pavilion master in the future. Even though he wouldn't reach the level of Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu, it was entirely possible for him to reach the level of the other pavilion masters. This man's swordsmanship wasn't fancy either. For 15 years, since he was 7 years old, he only knew one move, thrust. Not only was it fast, but it was also ruthless. Even someone at the same level as him wouldn't be able to block his thrust. This woman was an expert. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be able to pass through the crowd outside the archway. However, everyone felt that this woman would be in a sorry state even if she wasn't injured by this strike. Nevertheless, everyone moved closer to her and waited for her to fall before teaching her a lesson. Many people saw the woman's face clearly and were shocked. There was actually such a woman in this world. They had to spare her life later, clang. Everyone didn't see how the woman made her move. The strike that everyone thought would be extremely difficult to block flew into the air. The man was also sent flying and smashed into a house. This also made many people realize that this person wasn't only an expert, but he was also an absolute expert. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to block this strike so easily. At this moment, a shout came from the back of the crowd. Who dares to cause trouble here? When he said the first word, he was still at the back of the crowd. When he said the last word, there was already another person on a roof not far away from the archway. He was about 40 years old, wearing a green robe and a scholar's headband. There was a 3-foot beard on his chin, and he looked refined and refined. He looked like a scholar from Great Xia. As a matter of fact, he was a scholar in the past. Coincidentally, he entered the 9 pavilions and became one of the pavilion masters. 8th Pavilion Master. Everyone greeted. The 8th Pavilion Lord, Zhang Zijiang, stared at the girl not far away. A look of astonishment flashed in his eyes. Such a graceful girl with such outstanding skills. It was impossible for her to be a nobody. Who are you? Why did you cause trouble in the 9 pavilions? Ask Hua Sanlu to come out. The lady in red merely glanced at him from the corner of her eyes before ignoring him. This attitude showed that she didn't care about Zhang Zijiang at all. Arrogant. Everyone cursed. Zhang Zijiang's face also darkened. When he was young, his family was poor, so he hated being ignored. Those who ignored him in the past, after he became proficient in martial arts, came knocking on his door and killed them all. Among all the pavilion masters in the 9 pavilions, Zhang Zijiang was the most narrow-minded. If you want to meet the great pavilion master, I'll have to test your skills first. Before he finished his sentence, he leaped up, and a pair of steel claws appeared in his hands, gleaming with a cold light. Seeing Zhang Zijiang make his move, everyone was relieved. No matter how capable this lady was, she wouldn't be able to win against the 8th Pavilion Master. Although the 8th Pavilion Master was only ranked 91st in the world, it also meant that there were only 90 people in the world who could defeat him. How many martial artists were there in the world? Just this fact alone was enough for him to be ranked 91st, was enough for him to be proud of. Although the Empress ignored him, she could tell that he had some skills. If she stood still, the archway would be destroyed, which would create a huge enmity. After all, she was here for the antidote. With a move, the Empress directly went up to meet him. Both parties collided in the air. Before anyone could see clearly, Zhang Zijiang was smashed to the ground like a cannonball. Hiss! Everyone was stunned and took a deep breath in unison. The 91st in the world actually only had one face-to-face encounter with this lady. Who was this lady? Which woman was so powerful? The 3rd most powerful woman in the world, Li Yuanju? Impossible. Although she lived in seclusion, she had the image of a Taoist nun. The 7th most powerful woman in the world, Qi Zixiao? How could the Empress of Dao be here? The 12th most powerful woman in the world, Sun Mingyang? That woman seemed to be in her 40s. However, it was said that she had a technique to preserve her youthful looks, so it was hard to say. While everyone was in shock and guessing, Zhang Zijiang, who had smashed a hole in the ground, spat out a mouthful of blood and was shocked. Others couldn't see clearly, but he knew that the two of them exchanged 3 moves just now. However, that woman was too fast and too powerful. She didn't seem like a woman at all, but more like a giant beast. His hands were still numb after being hit by her. If she hadn't used her full strength at the last moment, he would have been seriously injured. Even if a woman from Great Xia was stronger than him, she wouldn't be able to make him feel completely helpless with just her strength alone. This woman wasn't from Great Xia. There was only one such woman in the world, Qi Zixiao. At the thought of this, he was horrified. With a flip, he jumped out of the hole. He landed on the ground, stared at the Empress, and said, "Qi Zixiao, why are you here?" After hearing what he said, everyone immediately stared at the Empress. It was actually Qi Zixiao. The Empress of Dao actually appeared here. Some of them had evil thoughts when they saw her face. At this moment, all these evil thoughts flowed out along with their cold sweat. A person's reputation was like the shadow of a tree. Who would dare to have any ideas about Qi Zixiao? Hua Sanlu, I'm here. Aren't you going to come out and welcome me? The Empress didn't hide anymore and directly transmitted her cold voice. At this moment, some of the people who were wholeheartedly cultivating and ignoring the outside world also jumped onto the roof. There were only a few people in the world who called themselves Emperor, and there was only one woman. When this voice spread out, the entire 9 pavilions was in an uproar. I didn't expect you to personally come here, Qi Zixiao. Your presence really brings light to my humble 9 pavilions. A feminine voice came from afar, following which a figure flashed in the air and appeared in front of everyone. As he landed, a few other figures jumped out from the pagoda and landed behind him. Chapter 196. In front of the crowd was a man in a flowery robe. His hair was loose, his face was powdered, and there was even a cinnabar between his eyebrows. He was considered handsome, but his body was filled with a gloomy aura. This man was the 9 Pavilions' Grand Pavilion Master, Hua Sanlu. He looked like he was in his early 20s, but in fact, he was already over 50. There were 8 people standing behind him. They were all different in height, weight, and weight. There was an old man who was getting old, and there was also a young girl who was about 16. These 9 people occupied the top 100 positions in the world. It could also be said that they were notorious. After the 8th Pavilion Master, Zhang Ziliu, mastered martial arts. He killed everyone who looked down on him. The old man in his 70s or 80s was the 4th Pavilion Master, Lu Wu. When he was young, he killed his parents and fed their bodies to the dogs. The woman who looked like a young girl was the 5th Pavilion Master, Shi Qingjiao. She had once gone down the mountain to hide her identity and marry a rich man's son. On the night of the wedding, she killed everyone and left. Initially, some people thought that she did it because of hatred or emotional entanglements. However, she said, "I fell in love with him the moment I saw him. I wished I could stay with him until my hair turned white. However, I suddenly didn't like him anymore, so I killed him." The others also had different kinds of evil deeds. However, they didn't cause much of an impact. The 9 pavilions were powerful, and even if there were people who didn't like them, they couldn't do anything to them. The Pavilion Master is here. Greetings, Pavilion Master. When everyone saw so many rare people gathered here, they were in awe. At this moment, they were sizing up Qi Zixiao, the legendary lady. Qi Zixiao stared at Hua Sanlu. "Oh my, what day is it today for such a distinguished guest to come to my 9 pavilions? If I had known earlier, I would have gone out to welcome you. I just don't know why you, the Empress of Dao, are here. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to return?" Hua Sanlu smiled mysteriously and spoke in an exaggerated tone. "Give me the antidote for half-dead. Tell me what you want." The Empress didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Half-dead? Is there an antidote for that?" Hua Sanlu was surprised. He then looked behind him suspiciously and asked, "Is there an antidote for half-dead? Why didn't I know about this?" Since Grand Pavilion Master hasn't heard of it, then there's naturally no such thing. Sure, Qingjiao covered her mouth and chuckled. Upon hearing this, the Empress's heart tightened and her murderous aura soared into the sky. If there was no antidote in the half-dead state, would that person be like a wooden man in the future? Ayaya, I remember now. There seems to be an antidote. My memory has been getting worse these past 2 years. However, I'm very curious. Who was the one who was afflicted with this half-dead poison that made you, the Empress of Dayo, personally come over to ask for it? Hua Sanlu chuckled. I heard that you've been raising a gigolo recently. Could it be him? In the entire imperial court of Dayo, apart from Hongwu, there is probably no one else worthy of your attention. The Empress exuded a cold aura, and the surrounding temperature dropped by a few degrees. There was even a gust of wind blowing, causing the Empress's hair to flutter. Give me the antidote. The Empress's voice was devoid of warmth. Ayaya, you're the one begging me now. I'm so scared when you talk like that. Hua Sanlu said in a weird tone. Everyone burst into laughter. If they saw Qi Zixiao outside, they really wouldn't dare to do anything. But here, with Hua Sanlu, who was more powerful than Qi Zixiao, around, no one had the slightest bit of fear. To be able to laugh at the 7th most powerful expert in the world and see her suffer a setback, they might not have such an opportunity again in this lifetime. The Empress frowned slightly, and the coldness in her body intensified. This Hua Sanlu was indeed the most ungraceful and disgusting one among the top 10 experts in Dayo. If it wasn't for the fact that she still wanted to get the antidote, she would have beaten him up without a second thought. Give me the antidote and you can state your conditions, the Empress said again. So generous, so awe-inspiring. As expected of Qi Zixiao. Since you said so, I'll state my conditions now. Hua Sanlu had a weird smile on his face. He pointed at the Empress and said, I want you. Everyone laughed again. At this moment, a layer of ice could be scraped off the Empress's face. That gigolo you were raising. Give him to me. I'll save him and he'll stay with me. How about that? I'm very curious about a man who can even charm someone like you. Hua Sanlu changed his tone and said, You're courting death. The Empress clenched her fists and said, In her entire life, who had ever spoken to her like this? If you brought along 1,500 winged cavalry warriors or Hongwu, I might not have dared to do it. But you came by yourself, why wouldn't I dare? Hua Sanlu laughed. What conditions do I have to give you the antidote? The Empress clenched her teeth and asked, Ayaya, you're really cute. You actually haven't fallen out with me yet. It seems like that person is really important. There aren't many opportunities like this. I have to think about it carefully. Hua Sanlu laughed again. Go, bring me the antidote, Hua Sanlu suddenly said to the person behind him. The 9th Pavilion Master, Zhu Lang, was plump and looked like a rich man. He had been wiping his sweat since he arrived. At this moment, after hearing Hua Sanlu's words, he immediately sighed and ran to the back. His movements weren't fast, but every step he took caused the ground to shake. It made people wonder if the 9th Pavilion Master's body was made of metal. Otherwise, how could he be so heavy? However, Zhu Lang was the person who researched medicine the most in the 9 pavilions. The place fell into silence for a moment. Hua Sanlu was racking his brains. What exactly did he want? After a while, Zhu Lang ran back again with a small box in his hand and threw it to Hua Sanlu. Do you want it? Hua Sanlu raised his head and looked at the Empress while playing with the box. Do you want it very much? State your conditions. The Empress looked at the box, and her expression loosened a little. No matter what, as long as she brought the box back, she would be able to save him. Conditions. I can't think of anything. I suddenly realized that I don't seem to want anything. If I like women, I might be able to have some fun with you. But I don't even like women. What else do I want? Hua Sanlu suddenly felt vexed. I suddenly feel that my life is very boring. I don't like men, I don't like women, and I don't like gold and silver. Don't you guys think that it's very boring? Hua Sanlu turned his head and looked at the people behind him. It's indeed boring. Simply too boring. A burly man who looked like he was cast from steel nodded his head in agreement. If it were me, I would just die. A skinny man who looked like a bamboo pole said sinisterly. Ayaya, this is a good idea. This is a good idea. When Hua Sanlu heard this, it was as if he had suddenly heard something funny and laughed cheerfully. He threw the box to Zhu Lang, raised his head, and looked at the Empress with a sneer. How about this? If you kill me, the thing will be yours. If you can't kill me, I will peel off your skin and make it into the most beautiful doll. I will place it here for everyone to see. How about that? The Empress let go of the black backpack and hung it on the archway. Then, she pounced toward Hua Sanlu. Chapter 197. At this moment, the Empress squinted her eyes and pounced on Hua Sanlu. If she wasn't waiting for the antidote, she wouldn't have been able to control herself. In the entire Dayo, who dared to speak to her like this? Outside of Dayo, who dared to speak to her like this? Do you really think that I can't touch you just because you're the 5th most powerful expert in the world? Do you really think that I can't beat you to death? Do you want to die? I'll beat you to death right now. At this moment, the Empress turned into an arrow in everyone's eyes. They could only see a blurry shadow, and from this, they could see the Empress's speed. Before anyone could react, she exchanged a few blows with Hua Sanlu, who was on the ground. Following a loud bang, both of them were sent flying. Those who didn't have time to react were sent flying by the explosion. Other than the archway behind the Empress, all the other buildings collapsed with a loud bang. Only the archway, which looked old and colorful, wasn't affected at all. Even the black bag hanging on the archway wasn't affected at all. Everyone was overwhelmed with shock. Was this the strength of the top 10 experts in the world? The Empress did a somersault and fell from the sky. When Hua Sanlu landed, he stomped on the heads of 3 people in succession before stabilizing himself. However, he didn't seem to care at all. Instead, he laughed and said, "Interesting, really interesting." At the same time, he leaped more than 10 meters high before pouncing on the Empress. In everyone's eyes, an incomparably huge pitch-black saber appeared in the sky and slashed down with boundless momentum. Just that aura alone was enough to make many people unable to move. This was an ability that only a few spirit wheel experts could master and use, the embodiment of the spirit, or rather, God martial arts. After passing the heavenly barrier, one could advance to the God level. The difference between the God level and the previous ones was that the God level cultivator cultivated the spirit and condensed all the essence, chi, and spirit in the body into God martial arts. Only after condensing God martial arts could one be considered a true top-notch expert. God martial arts was their strongest means of fighting the enemy. However, condensing God martial arts was a bottleneck for most people. Some spirit wheel experts even died because of this. This kind of thing happened frequently. Faced with this mountain-splitting saber, the Empress could even feel the sharpness of the saber. Both her eyes and even her hair turned blood red. This was the manifestation of the condensation of the blood and chi in the Aboriginal's body. The practitioners from the other countries would switch to practicing God martial arts after reaching the spirit will level, but the Aboriginals would always activate the power of their bloodline and spread the power of their blood throughout their bodies. This was the biggest difference between the two. The Empress clenched her fist and met the attack head-on. A series of loud noises rang out in the air. From below, everyone could only see a long black saber being wielded by a giant's arm as it continuously collided with a red figure. Explosions rang out incessantly, but every time they collided, the red figure would be pushed back a little. To think that the female Empress, who was known for her strength, was being suppressed by Hua Sanlu. As the two of them fought, the crowd below could no longer stand still and retreated into the distance. There was even one person who retreated a little too slowly and suddenly exploded into a shower of blood that filled the sky. At the same time, numerous blade marks that were a full foot deep appeared on the ground. This caused everyone to scramble to escape, afraid that they would be affected by the battle. Just the leaking sharp chi alone was enough to cause such damage to the ground. One could well imagine what kind of situation the Empress was in. As the two of them fought, even the other 8 pavilion masters had no choice but to retreat a little. They were deeply shocked by the strength of the two. Even though they already knew that Hua Sanliu's strength was unfathomable, no one expected it to be to this extent. Perhaps only the combined strength of the 8 Pavilion Masters would be able to contend against him. Boom! With another loud noise, the Empress was sent flying. She adjusted her body in midair and landed on a huge rock that was more than 100 meters away. As her feet landed on the ground, the huge rock beneath her feet cracked with a loud bang. The Empress raised her hand and saw that there were already a few shallow bloodstains on her fist. At this moment, there were also a few more wounds on her body. How can you kill me with just this amount of strength? Tell me, how can you kill me? Hua Sanlu laughed maniacally in the air. At this moment, the Empress's eyes and long hair were all blood red. Her shoes had long been shattered, and she was standing there barefooted. Phew, phew, what's that sound? The person who spoke was the burly man who looked like he was made of steel. He was the 3rd Pavilion Master, Zhong Feng. He seemed to have heard something. It's coming from that side. Shi Qingjiao looked at the direction where the Empress was standing with a serious face. At this moment, the Empress's aura was rising continuously, giving people the feeling that a ferocious beast was awakening. It's a sound of breathing, another Pavilion Master said in disbelief. This breathing sound gave him the feeling that a huge beast was breathing. It gave people the feeling that a huge beast was suppressing its bloodthirsty madness before attacking and accumulating energy in its body. At this moment, the Empress's body changed again. Strange patterns began to appear on her skin and covered her entire body. The Empress opened her mouth slightly, and as she breathed, a white mist was spat out from her mouth like an arrow before dissipating. Hua Sanlu, who was in the air, realized that something was amiss earlier than the others. Previously, Qi Zixiao's strength made him feel a little strange. Even though she was strong, she seemed to be weaker than the 7th most powerful expert in the world. After he had condensed his god of martial arts, the speed at which she fell into a disadvantageous position was too fast. At this moment, he realized that Qi Zixiao had actually not used her full strength all along. Now, Qi Zixiao's aura was a notch higher than before and was still growing. She was about to reach the point where she could compete with him as an equal. What kind of martial arts was this that could actually increase her strength by a notch in such a short period of time? Interrupt her. We can't let her continue. Hua Sanlu suddenly had this thought. Die. Following Hua Sanliu's shout, his god of martial arts transformed into countless saber shadows and slashed at the Empress who was standing on the huge rock. Phew! As the Empress exhaled a long breath, when she raised her head again, there was no longer any black color in her eyes. Her face was also covered with blood-red patterns. Roar! The Empress suddenly let out a roar and disappeared in an instant. When she reappeared, she was already in midair. She clenched her fists and faced the countless saber shadows. Boom, 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 boom. A series of loud collisions almost set off a sound wave. This time, even the 8 Pavilion Masters couldn't see what was happening on the battlefield. They could only see a black light that seemed to be engulfing everything. Occasionally, they would see a red dot at the edge of that black light, which proved that the person was still there. The Empress's fists collided with that ball of black light over and over again. Indiscernibly, cracks began to appear on the edge of that huge black saber, following which the cracks became bigger and bigger until they covered the entire saber. Roar! In midair, the Empress let out a roar that sounded like that of an ancient giant beast. She ferociously punched that black saber, and that long saber in midair suddenly shattered into countless pieces. A figure was thrown far away. Grand Pavilion Master! Everyone cried out involuntarily. Roar! In an instant, the Empress disappeared from the sky, following which she appeared above Hua Sanlu, who was thrown into the air. She punched Hua Sanliu's chest and smashed him down. The Empress followed him down like a shadow, punching him again and again. A black shield appeared in front of Hua Sanlu and barely blocked the Empress's fists. At this moment, Hua Sanlu was violently vomiting blood. Even his 5 orifices were bleeding. Bang, bang, bang. Save Grand Pavilion Master. The second Pavilion Master shouted loudly. The 8 of them looked at each other, but no one actually took a step forward. At this moment, Qi Zixiao was obviously not right. Even Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu had been defeated. At this moment, it was better for someone else to test the waters. All 8 of them thought so. Therefore, none of them moved. In the next moment, all 8 of them leaped out at the same time. A thin sword appeared in the hands of the second Pavilion Master, Jiang Hailu. The body of the third Pavilion Master, Zhong Feng, emitted a metallic luster. A long rod appeared in the hands of the fourth Pavilion Master, Lu Wang. Everyone had already condensed their god skills, but they had yet to reach the stage where they could enlarge and release their god skills like Hua Sanlu. They could only maintain stability when the god skills were formed in their hands. Bang! The Empress turned around in midair and ruthlessly stomped on Hua Sanliu's body. Immediately, a cloud of blood exploded in midair. The 8 people who had just leaped out immediately stopped in their tracks. Everyone's eyeballs were about to pop out. How is this possible? The 5th most powerful expert in the world, Hua Sanlu, was actually beaten up. After the Empress beat up Hua Sanlu, she suddenly lost all her strength and fell to the ground. She barely managed to stabilize her body, and the veins on her body began to gradually disappear. However, her eyes were still suffused with blood. She raised her head and looked at everyone. "Give me the antidote." Her voice was still cold. The might that she showed when she beat up Hua Sanlu was really terrifying. However, everyone could hear the frailty in her voice. The martial arts she used just now consumed too much of her energy. She can't hold on any longer. Everyone from the 9 pavilions, kill her. You will be rewarded handsomely. Everyone shouted, and their voices spread throughout the entire arena. Kill! Thousands of figures immediately rushed toward the Empress after hearing the order. Chapter 199. Kill her and avenge Grand Pavilion Master. Everyone shouted. The 9 pavilions had always been able to stand tall in the world because every generation's Grand Pavilion Master was ranked among the top 10 experts in the world. Furthermore, the other Pavilion Masters were not to be underestimated. Now that Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu was actually dead, it was imaginable how shocked everyone in the 9 pavilions was. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear and murderous intent. They were afraid of Qi Zixiao's strength, but they were also filled with murderous intent. The 9 pavilions' illustrious reputation was not only earned by the Pavilion Masters, but also by the disciples who were like mad dogs that wanted to bite their opponents even if they died. Furthermore, everyone could see that the Empress's body was unstable. Following the shouts of "seriously injured" and "kill," everyone rushed toward the Empress with bloodshot eyes. Among them, the fastest one wasn't anyone else but the fat, slow-moving 9th Pavilion Master Zhu Lang. He took a deep breath, and his entire body became even fatter. Following which, he leaped into the air like a meteorite and smashed toward the Empress with a whistling sound. The Empress raised her head and saw thousands of people rushing toward her. Her eyes were filled with coldness and murderous intent. You guys are courting death. However, the most important thing right now was Zhu Lang, who was smashing toward her like a meteorite. The Empress pinched her fingers and made a series of crisp sounds. Just now, she suddenly displayed astonishing strength and defeated Hua Sanlu, who was ranked above her. However, she paid a hefty price for it. The burst of power just now caused her internal organs to suffer great damage. Now that the power had receded, the feeling of weakness and pain alternated from every part of her body to her brain. Now that her strength had dropped to 30% of her peak, she needed at least a month to recover from the damage she suffered in return to her peak. The pain from every bone and muscle in her body made her movements much slower. Facing Zhu Lang, who was smashing down from the sky, the Empress did not dodge. Instead, she clenched her teeth and threw a punch at him. "I am Qi Zixiao. How can I be underestimated by all of you?" The Empress thought to herself with a gaze as sharp as a knife. The moment her fist collided with Zhu Lang, the Empress felt Zhu Lang's body go limp. Her fist was directly wrapped in fat, and that fat was still trembling as it absorbed her strength. Bang! After the collision, Zhu Lang was sent flying into the air like a ball. The ground beneath the Empress's feet cracked. The other person, whose entire body was covered in a metallic luster, charged toward the Empress like a raging bull. It was the third pavilion master of the 9 pavilions, Zhong Feng. Both he and Zhu Lang had fused their godly martial arts with their bodies. However, Zhong Feng's entire body seemed to be made of metal and was impervious to blades and swords. On the other hand, Zhu Lang's entire body seemed to be made of cotton that could deflect attacks. When the Empress and Zhong Feng's fists collided, a shock wave erupted from the point of contact. Zhong Feng retreated 5 to 6 steps, while the Empress retreated 7 to 8 steps. This made everyone even more certain that the Empress was in a bad situation. One had to know that if the Empress was at her peak, even if Zhong Feng condensed the power of his divine martial and doubled it, it would still be difficult for him to withstand a punch from Qi Zixiao. But now he had the upper hand. From this, it could be seen that the Empress was in a bad situation. At the same time, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and stabbed her waist with a pair of daggers. The Empress punched the edge of the daggers with both of her fists, producing a metallic clashing sound. 2 more bloodstains appeared on the Empress's fists. A long rod struck out from the Empress's left side, aiming at all the vital parts of the Empress's body. At the same time, a mass of sword shadows shrouded the Empress from top to bottom. The Empress had no choice but to retreat. At this point in time, she was being attacked from all directions. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't care about these people. But now that her strength had dropped to 30%, her speed had decreased significantly. The 8 pavilion masters had condensed their heaven-grade weapons, and their strength had increased tremendously. For a moment, the Empress was at a disadvantage. After receiving a rod strike, the sword shadows that filled the sky caused a few bloody lines to appear on her body. She seized an opportunity to rush out of the encirclement and leaped toward the archway. The Empress raised her eyebrows, and her heart was filled with murderous intent. If she wasn't willing to use this poison before, she would really be left here if she didn't use it now. Furthermore, she hadn't gotten the antidote yet. She couldn't leave, let alone escape. Qi Zixiao can't hold on any longer and wants to escape. Stop her. Seeing this situation, Jiang Hailu calmed down and a glint of excitement flashed in his eyes. In front of the Empress was a swarm of disciples from the 9 pavilions. She leaped up and wanted to leap over the heads of the crowd. 20 to 30 figures leaped up at the same time, brandishing all kinds of weapons in their hands. In the next moment, those 20 to 30 figures fell like dumplings in a pot. The Empress was also blocked by this and paused for a moment. Once again, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and slashed 27 times consecutively, transforming into a round of sword light. Get lost! The Empress's face was as cold as snow. She turned around and smashed her fist back. Both sides separated upon contact. Shi Qingjiao let out a muffled groan as she was sent flying. The Empress's hand was bleeding. Using this punch, the Empress flew a few meters away again. More than 10 figures leaped up to intercept her. Get lost! After knocking everyone down, she stepped on someone's body and headed straight for the archway. Her target was the bag hanging on the archway. Jiang Hailu, who was chasing after her, understood that there was definitely something strange about the bag. Otherwise, why would she do such a thing? However, it was too late for him to say anything. The Empress flipped over the archway, and that black bag was already in her hand. At the same time, a meatball smashed down like a meteorite. The Empress turned around in midair and kicked the ball. Even though she repelled Zhu Lang, she was smashed back to the ground and was immediately surrounded by many disciples from the 9 pavilions. The Empress took out 2 small bottles from the bag with one hand, crushed them, and poured them into her mouth. Not good, stop her. Upon seeing this, Jiang Hailu immediately thought that the Empress was taking some medicine to restore her body's condition. He hurriedly shouted, but it was too late. He could only look on helplessly as the Empress took the medicine. It will take time for the medicine to take effect. Surround and kill her. Jiang Hailu shouted and immediately pounced over. It wasn't only him who thought so. Everyone else thought so too. No one thought that the Empress would actually take the antidote to the poisonous gas. The Empress threw the bag on the ground and stepped on it. Immediately, all the bottles in the bag were smashed. The Empress kicked the bag with the tip of her foot. The bag was torn into pieces and flew toward the crowd. More than 10 people were injured by the broken glass. The bag of sarin gas was scattered in all directions and began to volatilize in the air. Only 0.5 milligrams of sarin gas was enough to kill an ordinary adult. It was colorless, odorless, and extremely volatile. The bag that the Empress was carrying was at least 10 kilograms. Scattered in this area, one could imagine the concentration of sarin gas. Chapter 200. The Empress was surrounded by 8 people. No matter who made a move, she would return it with a punch. She didn't use any fancy moves and relied entirely on brute force to defeat them. This had always been her style. No matter who her opponent was, she would kill them with a single punch. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't be afraid of these people. However, after defeating Hua Sanlu, she was at a complete disadvantage. Wounds were added to her body from time to time, and her red dress was already covered in blood. Not only was the blood flowing from her hands, but there was also a half-inch deep wound on her waist. This was left by Shi Qingjiao. She always looked for the most opportune moment to deal a fatal blow after the others attacked. If it was someone else, she would have already cut open their waist. On her shoulder, there was a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. This was left by Jiang Hailu. The Empress's face turned colder and paler. Her red lips were even more eye-catching, like blood and fire. Her gaze was still as cold as ever. Everyone admired Qi Zixiao's toughness. From the beginning to the end, there was no change in her gaze. Whether it was before or now, there was no sign of retreat or weakness. From the beginning to the end, she never flinched. However, although everyone admired her, it was more important to keep her here. Even if Hua Sanlu was dead, no one dared to underestimate the 9 pavilions. Not to mention the benefits from the great Xia imperial family. Qi Zixiao's head wasn't just priceless. She can't hold on any longer. Everyone understood that Qi Zixiao had a huge fight with Hua Sanlu. Even though it wasn't a long time, she had consumed a lot of energy. Now that she had lost so much blood, she wouldn't be able to hold on for long. At the thought of this, everyone moved faster and more ruthlessly. They even exchanged injuries for injuries and took advantage of this time to keep Qi Zixiao here. At this moment, some of the surrounding disciples of the 9 pavilions started to feel nauseous. Then, they fell to the ground. It wasn't just a few people, but more than 100 people fell to the ground. Such a commotion shocked everyone. Many people shouted their names and rushed to check, only to see their bodies twitching and foaming at the mouth. Poison. Everyone's expression changed drastically. Where did the poison come from? Qi Zixiao? Or was it someone else? But other than Qi Zixiao, who else could it be? Before everyone could figure out what exactly happened, the people around them also fell to the ground. Everyone dispersed. Although they did not know how Qi Zixiao poisoned them, they still subconsciously distanced themselves from each other. However, it was already too late. Batches of people began to fall as soon as they started moving. What would be the concentration of 10 kilograms of sarin gas after it was released? 1 kilogram of sarin gas could kill millions of people. 10 kilograms was enough to turn an area into a dead zone, not to mention in such a small area. Ordinary people would definitely die within 2 minutes if they were exposed. From the time the Empress kicked the sarin gas until now, a total of 7 minutes had passed. Excluding the time for the sarin gas to evaporate, she had been exposed to a high concentration of sarin gas for 5 minutes. The disciples of the 9 pavilions were much stronger than ordinary people. It took them 5 minutes to die, but because of this, everyone had inhaled a large amount of sarin gas. It was too late for them to escape. One by one, the disciples of the 9 pavilions ran out with terrified expressions on their faces. However, they didn't run far before they fell to the ground with their bodies twitching. The expressions of the 8 great pavilion masters changed drastically. No matter what, they had never thought that Qi Zixiao would actually poison them. Furthermore, they had no idea how she did it. Qi Zixiao, did you take the antidote just now? Jiang Hailu suddenly recalled the scene just now and immediately understood. What Qi Zixiao took just now wasn't some medicine to restore her body's condition, but an antidote. At this moment, everyone stopped and subconsciously looked at the black backpack that she had kicked into pieces. At this moment, it had turned into countless fragments that were scattered on the ground. Just now, Qi Zixiao took 2 small bottles from that backpack and drank them. Where would she find the antidote now? I've said before, all of you are courting death. The Empress looked at everyone coldly. Her breathing was somewhat rapid, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was extremely difficult for her to persevere for the past 7 minutes. Take out the antidote, Jiang Hailu shouted sternly with a glimmer of hope, even though he knew that it was very unlikely. At this moment, it was as if he had been doused with ice water, and his whole body was trembling. The faces of the others were deathly pale. Although they were still fine, it was only because they were stronger than ordinary disciples that they could persevere for a little longer. Antidote? I drank it, the Empress said faintly. This simple sentence made them tremble all over. The antidote you want is with me, and I will destroy it before I die. Zhu Lang's face turned ashen. It doesn't matter, I can go in and look for it. There must be more, the Empress said. There shouldn't be many antidotes that need to be stored in such a box. That's right, that antidote was previously stored in a very exquisite box. Presumably, it wasn't specially found by Zhu Lang. There was one more sentence that she didn't say for fear of reminding everyone. Even if the antidote was destroyed, as long as there was a little bit of residue left, it would be enough to compare the smell. Presumably, different antidotes had different ingredients and smells. I will kill you to accompany me in death. 3rd Pavilion Master Zhong Feng roared and rushed toward the Empress, but she dodged to the side. At this moment, she didn't need to persevere anymore. Except for a few ordinary disciples who were far away, all of them were lying on the ground. Although some of them were still twitching, they probably wouldn't be able to live much longer. These few people wouldn't be able to persevere for much longer. Even though they were at the spirit will level, they were only slightly stronger than the others. Furthermore, they had condensed their spirit martial arts and could persevere for a while longer. However, this didn't mean that they were immune to poison. Thousands of people were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. It was a ghastly sight. The few disciples who had escaped didn't dare to stay and ran far away. No one knew how wide the range of this poison was. Zhu Lang looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. He crushed the wooden box in his hand, turned around, and fled outside. He had a glimmer of hope in his heart that there might be a chance of survival if he left here. Seeing his actions, the others also started to move. 5 of them ran toward the periphery, while the other 4 felt that they couldn't escape death and rushed toward Qi Zixiao. Even if they were to die, they wanted to add 2 more scars to her body. However, Zhu Lang didn't even run 5 meters before he felt that it was getting harder and harder to control his body. Then he fell to the ground. He was the weakest among them and was the first to fall. The sound of Zhu Lang falling to the ground was like a heavy hammer hitting everyone's body. Everyone had a miserable look on their faces. Behind him was Zhang Zijiang, who was about to jump over the roof, but he fell head first. The Empress calmly dodged the attacks of the last 4 people and watched as they fell one by one. You can't leave, Great Xia. Zhang Heiliu's eyes were filled with viciousness. After he finished speaking, he fell a few steps away from the Empress. The Empress stood there indifferently. Other than 3 to 5 people who had escaped, the rest of the people in the 9 pavilions had fallen in this kernel. She knew that she had to hurry. She understood a little about the sarin gas from the other world. With such a high concentration, it would be very dangerous even if she took the antidote. It was just that the physical condition of the aboriginals was much better than that of the spirit wheel experts in Great Xia. In terms of physical strength, even 5 Hua Sanlias couldn't compare to her. Coupled with the antidote, it didn't have much of an effect on her. However, if she continued to stay here, it would be hard to say. In a flash, she came to Zhu Lang's side. He was holding some of the remaining dregs in his hands. After collecting them, the Empress plunged into those few pagodas to search. After a while, she left with a few boxes. As for the legacy of the 9 pavilions, it was indeed the top legacy of Great Xia. However, she wasn't interested in it and couldn't be bothered to plunder it. Behind her, only the ghost-like 9 pavilions and countless corpses were left on the ground. Other than a few ordinary disciples who had escaped, the rest of the 9 pavilions were all dead. Chapter 2:01. Ren Baqian was very anxious on the mountain. It was impossible to say that he wasn't worried. But other than moving his fingers, what else could he do? After waiting for at least 8 to 10 hours, Ren Baqian finally saw a red figure appear in front of him. At this moment, the Empress was in a sorry state. Her white inner shirt and red chiffon skirt were torn and stained with blood. Her waist and shoulders were dripping with blood. Her face was pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Zixiao. Ren Baqian's heart tightened. Seeing the Empress in this state, it was as if his heart was stabbed. In his eyes, the Empress had always been awe-inspiring. When had she ever looked like this? When had she ever been in such a sorry state? But who was she doing this for? With such thoughts in his mind, he couldn't speak for a moment. At this moment, he threw the matter of the antidote to the back of his mind. "Open your mouth." The Empress stood in front of him and said. A Longan-sized pill appeared in her hand, and a few boxes were thrown on the ground. Seeing that Ren Baqian was still in a daze, the Empress pinched open his mouth and popped the pill in. It almost got stuck in his throat and choked him to death. Seeing that he couldn't even breathe, she quickly slapped his back to get the pill out and stuffed it into his mouth. Ren Baqian chewed the pill with great difficulty and swallowed it. Then, the Empress stuffed a water bag into his mouth and drank a mouthful of water. Ren Baqian didn't have any complaints about almost choking to death. The Empress had always been like this. This small matter couldn't be compared to what she had done in the past. "Are your injuries serious?" Ren Baqian finally asked this question. "I can only use 30% of my strength for 1 month. But even with 30% of my strength, no one can stop me." The Empress was always full of confidence. "But I'm hungry." The Empress's tone changed. The battle just now caused a lot of damage to her body. At the same time, she felt a strong sense of hunger. The aboriginals needed to rely on large amounts of food or medicinal herbs to replenish their qi and blood. Ren Baqian moved his fingers but still couldn't move. The Empress looked at him and said, "It will take a while for the antidote to take effect. I will go and find some food." Ren Baqian nodded. The antidote wasn't an elixir and naturally wouldn't take effect immediately. He watched as the Empress left again. After the Empress left, Ren Baqian tried to move his body every once in a while. However, he couldn't move at all. Just when he was doubting whether the medicine that the Empress brought back with her injuries was effective, he felt his shoulder twisting a little. Ren Baqian's face immediately revealed an ecstatic expression. Although it was just a slight movement of his shoulder, he had not been able to move at all for the past 10 days. At this time, even the slightest change made him extremely sensitive and excited. This meant that the antidote was real. Following the movement of the shoulders, the forearms began to move as well, followed by the arms and the legs. When he could move his waist, he felt like he had come back to life. Ren Baqian supported Qi Shui, who was beside him, and tried to stand up. Not being able to move for more than 10 days made his body feel rusty. His joints kept creaking and his legs felt weak. He felt like he was experiencing the effects of aging in advance. If he wanted to recover, he would probably have to move a lot more. While Ren Baqian was moving his body, the Empress came back with a lot of meat wrapped in oiled paper. It was emitting a fragrant aroma. Seeing that Ren Baqian was moving carefully, the Empress revealed a look of joy in her eyes. She had finally saved him. This was the greatest joy in her heart at this moment. Zixiao. Ren Baqian looked at her with a face full of joy. The Empress suppressed the joy in her heart, carried the meat wrapped in oiled paper, and asked, "Do you want to eat?" Her voice was clear and less cold. "Okay." Ren Baqian nodded happily. As for the origin of the meat, he didn't care at all. In any case, the Empress definitely didn't have any money on her. Indeed, the Empress brought back a lot of meat and wine. Ren Baqian only ate a little and quietly watched the Empress eat. It was as if he could never get enough of her. "You have worked hard," Ren Baqian said sincerely. He didn't say thank you. At this moment, it was already meaningless to say thank you. The Empress raised her head and drank a mouthful of wine. She simply said, "If you lie to me in the future, I will kill you." Upon hearing this, Ren Baqian couldn't stop laughing. This made the Empress a little sullen. This guy was getting more and more impudent. After a long while, Ren Baqian finally stopped laughing. He looked at the Empress with a sincere face and said, "When the time comes, you won't have to do anything." The Empress remained silent and ignored him. After a while, the Empress finished eating the wine and meat. Feeling less hungry, she then said, "Let's go." Just now, 2 people ran away. We can't hide the news for long. We have to leave Great Xia before they react. Previously, 5 people ran away. The Empress caught up with 3 of them and killed them. She didn't know where the other 2 were hiding, but she couldn't be bothered to look for them. A day after the 2 of them left, a group of people arrived at the call of the 9 pavilions. Among them, the leader was a man in his 30s who was dressed in an embroidered robe. Even though the 9 pavilions was feared by many, they still had some dealings with the outside world. Otherwise, how could the Lien family be in such a desperate situation? This group of people came to the 9 pavilions for some business. However, when they walked to the mountain pass, everyone's facial expression immediately changed. From here, they could see countless corpses lying on the ground. Almost all the buildings near the gate of the 9 pavilions had collapsed. What happened here? Everyone was shocked. Someone launched a large-scale attack on the 9 pavilions? How is this possible? Who was so daring? More importantly, the 9 pavilions was like a ghost town at this moment. There wasn't the slightest movement inside. The last time they came here, there were many disciples and livestock. But now, there wasn't even a bug in sight. Everyone stood at the mountain pass and didn't know whether to advance or retreat. They wanted to go forward and check, but they were afraid that there were enemies inside. After waiting for more than an hour, there was still no sound inside. At this time, everyone mustered up their courage and went down. The more the leader in the embroidered robe walked in, the more shocked he was because the corpses lying on the ground were all disciples of the 9 pavilions. Very quickly, everyone realized that these people were all poisoned to death. The 9 pavilions were famous for their use of poison. How could there be a poison expert in this world who could actually poison the people of the 9 pavilions to death? What about Hua Sanlu? What about the other 8 pavilion masters? Even if ordinary disciples were poisoned to death, these few people couldn't possibly be poisoned to death, right? When he saw half a corpse, his whole body instantly froze. This corpse only had a head above the chest. He had seen this face before. It was Hua Sanlu, the 5th most powerful expert in the world, Hua Sanlu. Previously, he had only seen him twice from afar. At that time, he was so powerful. Now, he actually died here? Since Hua Sanlu died here, could it be that the other pavilion masters were also dead? Otherwise, why wasn't there anyone cleaning up here? Suddenly, a thought emerged in his mind. This thought terrified him. If this news were to spread, the whole world would probably be shaken. The 9 pavilions had actually been destroyed. Soon after, another thought emerged in his mind. Since the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, were the resources and secret manuals that the 9 pavilions had accumulated over the past few hundred years still around? When he thought of this, he suddenly felt a burning passion in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the 9 pavilions with a burning gaze. However, when he walked to the entrance of the village, a person beside him suddenly fell to the ground, followed by a second and a third person. This made him suddenly think of something. Was there still poison here? When he hurriedly tried to leave, he didn't run far before he fell to the ground. Yes, even though a day had passed, the sarin gas still lingered in the air here. Furthermore, it was attached to those corpses. When they checked and flipped over the corpses just now, they naturally came into contact with some. Only a few people who were guarding the mountain pass were spared. A few of them rushed in and carried the man away, but he was already foaming at the mouth and dead. When the rest of the people saw this, they hurriedly ran out of the mountain. As they left, the news of the 9 pavilions being destroyed spread. In just 2 days, countless people gathered outside the mountain. The 2 disciples who originally ran away wanted to come back in 2 days to take a look and bring away those ancient manuals. Therefore, they hesitated and did not spread the news of Qi Zixiao's arrival in Great Xia. It was just that they did not dare to go near for a while and were discovered by these people. It was only now that the others learned from the 2 disciples that Dao's Empress, Qi Zixiao, personally came to the 9 pavilions, beat up Hua Sanlu, and used an unknown poison to kill the 8 pavilion masters and all the disciples of the 9 pavilions. Everyone was shocked. Subsequently, the whole world was shocked. Countless pigeons spread this news throughout the entire Great Xia in just 2 days, and then to the rest of the world. Countless people spread this news by word of mouth. Countless people were shocked by the fact that the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, and even more people guessed Qi Zixiao's strength. After all, she could beat up Hua Sanlu, which meant that she was ranked 5th in the world now. There were even more people guessing what poison Qi Zixiao used to kill thousands of people in the 9 pavilions, including the 8 pavilion masters, in such a short period of time. No one knew that the Empress of Dao, Qi Zixiao, who was originally ranked 7th in the world, was actually an expert in using poison. Her identity, the strength that she had displayed, and the methods that she had displayed, all of them had shocked the world. At the same time, the troops at the border were getting ready, and countless experts were dispatched. No matter what, they had to make Qi Zixiao stay and not let her return to Dao. Chapter 202. When the news of the destruction of the 9 pavilions spread, countless people in Great Xia were shocked. On Earth, in Istanbul, a man and a woman were shuttling through the streets and alleys of this famous tourist city like an ordinary couple. Every day, there were countless such couples coming to this city from all over the world. As a result, it was hard to attract attention. If there was anything that caught people's attention, it would be the combination of that woman's exquisite and heroic face, as well as her ice-cold aura that kept strangers away. However, that feeling was completely gone at this moment. All her attention was on the Turkish barbecue meat in her hands, and she only occasionally glanced at the beautiful scenery around her. Rinpoche was also carrying a bag with all kinds of famous local snacks in it. The 2 of them bought and ate along the way. Rinpoche carried the bag along the way, and the Empress ate along the way. Every time Rinpoche saw a snack, he would run over and buy it. He would try a little bit of it himself, and the rest would go into the Empress's mouth. Ever since the battle that day, the Empress's appetite had increased tremendously. She could get about 40 kilograms of meat from a 50-kilogram sheep, which was enough for a strong man to eat. The Empress could eat 2 of them leisurely, which was equivalent to her weight. No matter what food entered her stomach, it would be immediately digested and turned into essence energy, replenishing every cell in her body. During the 2 days of travel, the 2 of them would stop occasionally. The Empress would catch a few animals for Rinpoche to roast. Then, she would sit on Qi Shui's back and eat them elegantly, but at an extremely fast speed. This slowed down their travel speed by quite a bit. After returning to Earth, the 2 of them took the opportunity to recuperate. Rinpoche took good care of his body since he was still a little weak. On the other hand, the Empress was a man of few words and focused all her attention on eating. However, Rinpoche didn't know that under the Empress's calm expression, her entire body was in pain. It was just that she was tough and endured everything without batting an eyelid. She would only speak when she was hungry. Looking at the Empress finishing a Turkish barbecue and vegetable pancake, Rinpoche handed her the lion's milk, which was Turkish liquor, that he had just bought from a restaurant. This kind of anise liquor was generally around 70 degrees. After mixing it with water or ice, it would turn milky white before being drunk. The Empress raised her head and gulped down half a bottle of lion's milk that had been mixed with ice cubes. Her face was slightly red as she had already drunk 3 bottles of lion's milk along the way. Yes, she hadn't stopped eating since she arrived in the morning. The food that she ate while she was on the road in Great Xia wasn't enough for her. However, she was able to catch some animals from time to time for Rinpoche to roast and eat since they were on the road. Now that she had returned to the safety of Earth, she could finally eat to her heart's content. Rinpoche looked at the corner of the Empress's mouth and used his finger to rub it. The Empress paused for a moment, turned her head to look at him, lowered her head, and continued to look at the multi-layered pancake in her hand. Then, she gently bit it. The two of them walked around for a long time, but they didn't feel much about the beautiful scenery and exotic flavors here. However, they had an intuitive understanding of the snacks here. In the afternoon, the two of them went to the beach in Istanbul, near the mouth of the Black Sea. There were many people on the beach, and hot beauties in bikinis could be seen everywhere. They had beach mats under their bodies and were lying there basking in the sun. The two of them stood near the beach. Rinpoche's gaze roamed around the beach. All kinds of hot beauties in bikinis were a very common sight in this world, but it made the Empress raise her eyebrows. "Do they look good?" the Empress asked coldly. "No, they can't be compared to you. There's no comparison at all. You can see that my gaze isn't on them." Rinpoche turned his head to look at her and shook his head. "Everything here, the sea, the beach, and the people here are just embellishments to serve as a foil to a person." At this moment, the Empress was a little tipsy. After drinking a few bottles of lion's milk, she became even more beautiful and moving. Rinpoche felt that she was like a flame, and he was the moth that couldn't help but throw himself into it. Well, in fact, he just liked to see the Empress frown, smile, and frown. The kind of liveliness that was rarely seen in Dayo also made him want to tease her a little. However, he only gave it a little every time. He wasn't a bullfighter and didn't want to be on the edge of life and death. However, he didn't come here just to make the Empress angry. He really liked the sea. Perhaps this was some kind of desire in the heart of a person who grew up in the mainland. For example, I have a house facing the sea where spring is warm and the flowers are blooming. This definitely wasn't something that people who live by the coast could say. The sea was always the romance of the people in the mainland, especially when they were in pairs. In fact, people who lived by the coast didn't think so. This was because living by the sea was too humid, especially when it was a house with a sea view. After living for a long time, it was easy to get rheumatism and various kinds of cold diseases. The Empress was originally somewhat unhappy. After hearing what Rinpoche said, she didn't say much and continued to eat her snacks with a cold face. At this moment, she was holding a cheese roll in her hand. This kind of sweet food was also her favorite. Rinpoche smiled and said, "If you don't like it here, then go back." After spending half a day in the car, it was worth it to see the Empress's "I'm not happy" expression. Both of them returned to the city and stayed for a night. The next day, they took a flight to the imperial capital. After staying for a night, they chartered a car to return to Shurcheng early the next morning. Rinpoche threw his things on the floor and immediately collapsed on the sofa. Originally, his body hadn't recovered. Moreover, he was so tired from the long journey that he really felt that he didn't have any strength at all. In less than half an hour, the Empress looked at him with bright and piercing eyes and said, "I'm hungry." "Okay." Rinpoche leaned on the sofa and turned his head with a smile on his face. Such a simple request was something that he had to do even if he was tired. Both of them then drove out to have a meal and went to the supermarket to buy a bunch of food. For the entire afternoon, they curled up on the sofa and ate all kinds of snacks, KFC family buckets, pizza, donkey barbecue, and all kinds of cooked food while watching a movie. Occasionally, Rinpoche would snatch a piece of food from the Empress's hands to eat. Every time, the Empress would look at him, but he still didn't get tired of it. Even though there was a pile of food on the table, he still felt that the thing in the Empress's hands was more tempting to him. At night, Rinpoche watched the Empress enter her room. Only then did he return upstairs in a cheerful mood to visualize the visualization of water. Previously, when he was poisoned, every time he visualized the visualization of water, the lake water would surge like raging waves, making it impossible for him to dive into it. It wasn't until these few days that he could move his body that he could gradually dive into the lake. The lake in the visualization of water was originally a part of his body. Every time he dived into the lake, his body would change little by little. To put it simply, his kidneys were of the water attribute. It was just that the time he spent cultivating was too short. Other than his strength increasing to about 160 kilograms under the effect of the drug, he didn't discover any other changes. The next morning, Rinpoche woke up and made breakfast for the Empress. Then, he gave Chunqing a call to inform him that he was fine now. Upon hearing this news, Chunqing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. These days, he practically squatted in the laboratory, but unfortunately, the progress was very slow. Less than 10 minutes after Rinpoche called Chunqing, he received another call from Chunqing. When he picked up the call, he heard a woman's voice coming from the other end. "Lucky boy, where are you? Can you come to the laboratory for a while?" Not interested. Rinpoche immediately knew that it was Su Shan's voice and immediately hung up the call. Since he was fine now, he had no interest in going to the laboratory. Less than 10 seconds later, the phone started to ring again. Rinpoche immediately hung up the call. On the third time, Rinpoche frowned and picked up the call. "Boss, don't forget that you are our boss. Do you know what kind of impact the earworm will have on this world? As long as there is a way to control it, it can cure terminal illnesses like leukemia. The whole world will benefit from it, and you will also become a billionaire. Now that the progress of the experiment is very slow, please make a trip down to the laboratory." Su Shan was afraid that Rinpoche would hang up the call again. Once the call was connected, a series of words burst out of her mouth. "Money has no meaning to me anymore," Rinpoche muttered softly. Money really had no meaning to him anymore. However, if it was as effective as what Su Shan said, it would be a pity to ignore it. The Empress seemed to have brought back a few more antidotes. And if he was able to develop a special drug to cure leukemia, not only would he gain money, he would also gain social status in this world. In the future, if he wanted to obtain certain things, the necessary social status and connections were indispensable. Currently, if he wanted to obtain any important things, such as a CNC machine tool or other high-tech products, he did not have any means to do so. Even if he wanted to sell gemstones, he had to go through Chunqing. If he were to enter the circle of the rich and powerful, as long as he occasionally befriended some people, it would be of great help to him in obtaining whatever he wanted. Chapter 203. In the afternoon, Rinpoche and the Empress brought the antidote to the bottom of the building where the laboratory was located and gave Chunqing a call. Not long after, Su Shan and Sun Qing directly ran downstairs to pick him up. It seemed like they couldn't wait any longer. Upon seeing him, they immediately pulled him over and carefully examined him from top to bottom. "That's enough from the both of you." Rinpoche looked unhappy. "The last time he was poisoned, the both of you checked for a long time, but to no avail. Now you two are touching me from top to bottom like perverts. What do you two want? Which bastard touched my buttocks? F***CK. You almost touched my DD. Rinpoche's face turned green. The two of them then pulled Rinpoche with a surprised look. "Lucky boy, how exactly did you do it? Let's go up and talk." Rinpoche looked at the Empress's face, which had the word, "I'm not happy," written all over it. If this was in Dayo, she might have slapped these two to death. Simply put, she was protecting her food. Rinpoche had already discovered this a long time ago. However, in this world, the Empress was already very restrained. They took the elevator up. Chunqing wasn't there, but Chunqing's father was already waiting upstairs. His gaze first fell on the Empress. These few years, he had seen all kinds of people and felt that he had some foresight. Even though this woman's appearance was stunning, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that when he saw her, he would naturally start to be cautious, afraid of offending her. Ordinary people might not feel this so obviously, but for a wily old fox like him who had seen all kinds of officials, he was especially sensitive. This woman was definitely the kind of person who held the power of life and death. However, his gaze only swept across the other party and returned to Rinpoche. He really didn't dare to be rash, lest he offended her for unknown reasons. This kind of person should never be offended. It's good that you are fine. I heard from Chun-Xing a few days ago and was still worried. Now that you are fine, everything is fine, Papa Chan said with a warm smile. Thank you, uncle. Both parties had always had a good relationship. Rinpoche also had a very good impression of Papa Chan. Just like the matter of this laboratory, even though he saved Chun-Xing, if it was someone else, they wouldn't give him 60% of the shares just for a formula and a sample. It would already be considered pretty good if they could give him 40%. However, at that time, Papa Chan was just an ordinary person with a salary of a few thousand yuan. Since then, Rinpoche felt that Papa Chan was someone he could work with. Therefore, he did not think too much about bringing the antidote this time. Otherwise, normal people wouldn't take out such a thing so easily. This was because the previous laboratory and agreement were only related to the black mud cream. However, he didn't care about these things. Things on this side of Earth seemed to have lost their appeal to him. Although he still didn't have money, status, or a young model, he no longer yearned for them. It was enough for him to have a certain status on Earth and obtain what he needed. Is it convenient for you to introduce us? Papa Chin chuckled. Although he could sense that this woman was not an ordinary person, there was no harm in getting intimate with her. Who knows, he might be able to get intimate with some big boss. For a businessman like him, this was a dream come true. Rinpoche turned his head and looked at the Empress. She was also looking at him. My fiancé. Rinpoche looked at the Empress and said. The Empress's eyes flickered for a moment before she shifted her gaze elsewhere. Cough, cough. Hearing this answer, Papa Chan almost choked to death. Very compatible, Papa Chan praised after coughing a few times. His tone was sincere. If an ordinary person heard this, they would probably think that he really thought so. Seeing that Rinpoche only said this sentence, Papa Chan didn't ask any further. In any case, he and Rinpoche were in the same boat now. Following which, Su Shan and Sun Qing performed a series of checkups on Rinpoche. To their surprise, he had really recovered. The earworms in his body had completely disappeared. How did you do it? What did you eat? Both of them looked excited. Papa Chan was also moved. In fact, he knew about this matter. Sun Qing and Su Shan directly looked for him to request for more equipment and research on the earworms. Furthermore, they described the prospects of the earworms. Therefore, other than expressing his concern, he also came here for this reason. This is the antidote. Rinpoche took out a small antique box from the bag that he was carrying. Su Shan and Sun Qing's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Papa Chen's gaze was also fixed on that box. At the same time, he was calculating what he should pay to make the other party hand over this box. He was very clear about this matter. Previously, the agreement between both parties was only about the black mud cream. Now that Rinpoche took out this item, its value wasn't any lower than the black mud cream. After all, his identity determined his way of thinking. I only have these few left. Be careful and take good care of them. If they are used up, then there's nothing I can do. Rinpoche took out another box and placed it on the table beside him. He felt that if it was just to test the composition and find the substance that was effective on the earworms, 2 boxes should be enough. As for the other box in his bag, he kept it as a backup. Rinpoche's straightforwardness was somewhat out of Papa Chen's expectations. Papa Chan looked at Su Shan and Sun Qing opening and inspecting the boxes as if they had obtained treasures before hurriedly sending them away. Papa Chan then said to Rinpoche, Bachien, if the research is successful, I will give you 15% of the shares. It was foreseeable that the results of this laboratory would bring in tens of billions of yuan in the future. Originally, Papa Chin only owned 40% of the shares. If he gave up 15% of the shares, Not only would he be handing over hundreds of millions or even billions of yuan of assets to others, but it would also greatly reduce his control over this laboratory and the future pharmaceutical factory. Of course, the prerequisite was that there were results from the research. Even if he lost 15% of the shares, the profits wouldn't be reduced. Something that would affect the future wealth of hundreds of millions of yuan was a huge matter. Naturally, both parties had to sign a new agreement. The reason why he said this now was because there was a lady beside Rinpoche that made him feel pressured. Because of his first impression, he felt that such a lady couldn't be nurtured even by a wealthy merchant family. To be able to nurture such a lady with the temperament of controlling life and death, only a family with a long history in politics or the military would be able to nurture her. Therefore, he expressed his position at the right time to prevent others from feeling that he had taken too much. There were many things that needed to be done appropriately. Forget it, uncle. I have already said that I'm not too interested in these things. Just like what you said to me in the past. When doing business, a win-win situation is the most important. I have always engraved this in my heart. Regardless of whether it is the laboratory or the pharmaceutical factory, you are the one in charge. My mind isn't on them, and I don't care about earning more money. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, when he was in Dayo, he was backed by the entire earth. However, when he was on earth, he was backed by another world, especially the Empress and the entire Dayo. He really didn't care about earning money. Rinpoche was full of confidence and spoke in an imposing manner. His carefree manner surprised Papa Chun. In less than a year, he didn't know what this young man had experienced to actually grow to such an extent. He was even willing to hand over the wealth that was easily obtainable. After being slightly surprised, Papa Chun laughed and said, "If you call me uncle, then I will be taking advantage of you." Both parties chatted for a while, and Rinpoche rejected Papa Chun's suggestion again. He didn't say anything else, but he felt that this young man would be very impressive in the future. Chapter 204. Caven, coupled with sleepiness, went asleep first. Recently, he should have changed the time. Chapter 205. Rinpoche and the Empress went shopping in the shopping mall. As long as the Empress set her eyes on a dress, Rinpoche would immediately buy it. Halfway through the shopping mall, Rinpoche had no choice but to return the huge pile of shopping bags to the car and continue shopping with the Empress. The Empress was in a good mood. However, when they arrived at the underwear store, Rinpoche realized that the Empress was still standing outside after taking a few steps. Her footsteps were motionless, and her gaze was wandering. It was unknown where her gaze was focused. Rinpoche stood inside and smiled. He casually chose 7 or 8 types of women's underwear and asked the shop assistant to find the right size and wrap them up. The underwear shop assistant also felt that it was a little funny. Women wouldn't take a step into the underwear shop no matter what, but men came in and chose to pack. Such a situation was really rare. When Rinpoche came out with a paper bag, the Empress did not even look at him. The customs of Dayo weren't considered conservative. Hot women wearing animal skin skirts could be seen all over the streets. After all, the weather in Dayo was simply too hot. However, the Empress was an exception. Due to her identity, she rarely interacted with the outside world. She always had a dignified look on her face. As a result, she subconsciously felt a little shy when it came to undergarments. After a trip to the mall, the back seat and trunk of the car were almost full. All of them were wearing red dresses. Even though the designs were similar, there were only slight differences. Both of them found another restaurant. Rinpoche watched as the Empress ate enough food for 10 people. Even the waiter had a strange look in his eyes when he added more food. Only then did both of them stop eating, or rather, the Empress put down her chopsticks. "Are you full?" Rinpoche asked. "Just a little bit more." The Empress wasn't embarrassed about her appetite. The Aboriginals had always had large appetites, let alone someone like her. She had long since automatically ignored the gazes of others. She didn't care what the ants thought of her. Go to another restaurant? Have a taste of other cuisines? Rinpoche looked at the plates on the table and asked with a smile. All right. The water Empress nodded. The two of them went to 3 restaurants in one night: Shandong cuisine, Hunan cuisine, and finally a dumpling restaurant. After that, they went back and went to deliver everything to the house before they could finally rest. The two of them curled up on the sofa and watched TV. The lights were off, and only the light and sound of the TV could be heard. The movie was the Mandarin version of Transformers. It was the same movie that Rinpoche used to scare the Empress. This time, he dug it out and found that there were many scenes of modern military combat. This would allow the Empress to gain some knowledge and understand more. However, Rinpoche felt a little helpless when he saw the end of the movie. He had watched this movie a long time ago and couldn't remember it clearly. After looking at it again, he realized that the soldiers inside were really weak. He reckoned that even the Empress could dismantle the Transformer with her bare hands, let alone the soldiers. Rinpoche turned his head and said, "The modern army is much more powerful than those in the movies, especially the various missiles, nuclear bombs, and other weapons of mass destruction, just like the sarin gas that you used before." "Got it," the Empress replied casually as she watched the battle between the robots and humans on the television with bright eyes. After watching 2 Transformers movies in a row, Rinpoche switched off the television. The Empress felt a little regretful as there seemed to be more movies to come. In a mansion in Ping City, a group of people stood around a table and looked at a map. Her Majesty took this route. Hongwu drew a line on the map and said, "A straight line from Lan City." Her Majesty had already disappeared for half a month. When Hongwu first heard the news, he even tore down his house. He never expected that Her Majesty would actually go to Great Xia's 9 pavilions alone for that brat. If he had known earlier, he would have killed that brat with a single palm strike. He believed that Her Majesty wouldn't have blamed him for this. After all, when Her Majesty chose Rinpoche, her reason was merely that she didn't dislike him. Her Majesty didn't seem to have much feelings for him either. However, he didn't know what exactly happened during this period of time. He couldn't understand why Her Majesty would actually put herself in such a dangerous situation for him. Now that Her Majesty actually did such a thing for that brat, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to touch that brat anymore. At present, Hongwu's greatest wish was for Her Majesty to return safely and for that brat to die there. However, it was really hard to say what would happen if Her Majesty personally went to the 9 pavilions. Those lunatics in the 9 pavilions weren't people who were easy to deal with, especially when Her Majesty was in an enemy nation. If she was discovered, Great Xia would definitely not give up this opportunity. "What's the current situation of the winged cavalry?" Hongwu asked in a deep voice. For the past half a month, he had only slept for slightly more than 2 hours every day and was a little tired. However, he still had to perk up in front of everyone. In the eyes of everyone, the general who supports the nation, Hongwu had always been like a stabilizing force. As long as he could maintain his composure, the others wouldn't panic. There's no news. There are a total of 1,500 winged cavalry warriors, and they have been in Great Xia for 10 days. Even if they were divided into 10 teams, it would still be hard to avoid being detected, someone answered from below. As long as one of the teams can find Her Majesty, we will know her location, Hongwu said in a deep voice. Every team of the winged cavalry had a carrier pigeon that was used to send messages. Right now, he was waiting for news from the winged cavalry so that he could personally escort Her Majesty back. Everyone sighed in despair. The longer Her Majesty was in Great Xia, the more dangerous it would be. It was the same for the winged cavalry. Everyone also knew that they could only wait for the winged cavalry's carrier pigeon, as Hongwu had said. "Sir, there's news about Her Majesty." While everyone was still pondering in the room, someone suddenly ran in quickly. Upon hearing this, everyone's face lit up. They were afraid that there wouldn't be any news, and as long as there was news, it was a good thing. "What news? Speak." Hongwu's eyes lit up. Her Majesty killed Hua Sanlu in the 9 pavilions and used poison to destroy the 9 pavilions. Only 2 disciples escaped, the soldier said loudly. The room was silent at first. Then everyone burst into an uproar. The information contained in this sentence was too great. Her Majesty actually killed Hua Sanlu, and this was something that no one had expected. Previously, everyone was afraid that Her Majesty would have a conflict with the 9 pavilions. After all, everyone knew Her Majesty's temperament. Coupled with the bunch of lunatics in the 9 pavilions, there was a high possibility of a conflict. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world, and Her Majesty was ranked 7th. Everyone wasn't optimistic about Her Majesty's chances of winning. The best outcome was that both sides would suffer. Then, Her Majesty would probably be hunted down by the people in the 9 pavilions. Therefore, the winged cavalry took the risk to enter Great Xia and head straight for the 9 pavilions. Along the way, they also searched for traces of Her Majesty. If Hongwu didn't know that he couldn't catch up with Her Majesty and that he had to stay in Ping City, he would have gone to the 9 pavilions first. However, no one expected Her Majesty to actually kill Hua Sanlu. This was really beyond everyone's expectations. There was another piece of news that was even more unbelievable than the previous one. Who didn't know what Her Majesty was like? She had always been straightforward. Since when did she know how to use poison? Furthermore, even though the 9 pavilions weren't considered the best in terms of using poison, they weren't too weak either. However, Her Majesty was actually able to poison everyone in the 9 pavilions to death. According to this piece of news, only 2 disciples escaped, and the 8 pavilion masters were also dead. What exactly was going on? This time, Her Majesty only left with Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpochian. Could it be that Rinpochian was an expert in using poison? Furthermore, he was an expert who could destroy the 9 pavilions with poison? This thought emerged in everyone's mind. Other than this, there was no other explanation. Is there any other news? Where is Her Majesty now? Hongwu suppressed the shock in his heart and asked in a deep voice. It is said that Her Majesty is seriously injured and her current whereabouts are unknown. Her Majesty reached the 9 pavilions 4 days ago and left on the same day. That soldier continued. Bang! The table under Hongwu's palm instantly turned into sawdust. At this moment, Qi Shui, which was carrying the Empress and Rinpochian on its back, suddenly stopped running. It lowered its body and looked at the 2 ladies in front of it vigilantly. Both of them were dressed like Taoist nuns. One of them wore a headband on her forehead and a pendant hung between her eyebrows. She had an ethereal temperament and was exceptionally beautiful. She didn't look like a woman of this world, and her eyes were as clear and tranquil as a lake. Chapter 206. Hey, senior sister, wait for me. You could get others to look for these 7 leaves, but you have to come out and look for them yourself. A 15 or 16-year-old girl in a Taoist robe was bouncing around the mountains like a cheerful deer. Another Taoist, nun, was carrying a cloth bag. From time to time, she would enter the forest and stop in front of a shrub. She would gently pick a fingernail-sized nut and put it in the cloth bag. This fruit was called 7 leaves. After the outer shell was peeled off, the kernel would be revealed. It was high in oil and sweet in the mouth. It was a favorite snack of many people in Great Xia and could even be used to extract oil. It was very expensive for ordinary people who couldn't bear to eat it after picking it in the mountains and sold it in the city. However, this thing was nothing to the Taoist nun. As long as she opened her mouth, countless people would come to her door and she wouldn't be able to eat it in her lifetime. Therefore, she didn't understand why senior sister would go up the mountain to pick the 7 leaves every year at this time. Moreover, she had to go so far. It was those guys who had picked all the 7 leaves near the Taoist temple. Senior sister and she had to run for a long time to find this place. Wasn't it all about eating? What was the difference? Wouldn't it be more fragrant if she picked it herself? You will know in the future. The otherworldly woman smiled faintly. Her smile was plain and modest. She was Li Yuanzhu, the 3rd most powerful expert in the world. If Hua Sanlu was said to be the most hated person among the experts, she was the most admired person in Great Xia. Ever since she became famous, she had never killed a single person, nor had her hands been stained with blood. She had always been plain and modest, making people feel close to her. Even a woodcutter or an old woman from a farmer's family wouldn't feel uncomfortable when they saw her. At most, they would say that this girl was really beautiful. This was a woman who was like a fairy in everyone's heart. The other 15 or 16-year-old girl was called Ning Qing. She was said to be Li Yuanju's junior sister, but in fact, Li Yuanju's master had died long ago. Ning Qing was just taking in a disciple on behalf of her master. At this moment, she said that she was going to accompany Li Yuanju to pick the 7 leaves, but she jumped around the moment she entered the forest. She liked everything she saw, be it a red leaf or a beautiful stone. Occasionally, she would yell and chase after a small beast, but she didn't pick a single 7 leaves. While Li Yuanju plucked the 7 leaves, Ning Qing played for the whole afternoon before returning to Li Yuanju's side. She pretended to help pluck a few leaves, but her eyes were attracted by a few bugs. Li Yuanju smiled helplessly when she saw her expression. She was always like this and couldn't stop. "All right, senior sister, that Qi Zixiao is also very powerful. I heard that she killed Hua Sanlu. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world. His ranking was even higher than hers, but he was actually killed by her." Ning Qing was jumping up and down again. Suddenly, she recalled something she heard and turned her head to say, "Of course." Li Yuanju pursed her lips and smiled. "I didn't expect Qi Zixiao to come to the great Xia dynasty. She could have been an emperor, but she went to fight with Hua Sanlu." Ning Qing asked curiously. Li Yuanju recalled the information she had heard and found it very interesting and unexpected, but she didn't say it out loud. She never liked to talk about such gossip. "It would be great if I could meet her. I heard that she is the most beautiful woman in the world. I really want to see what she looks like, but she is definitely not as beautiful as senior sister," Ning Qing mumbled again. Her senior sister had a mild temperament and didn't care about anything. However, she paid a lot of attention to the other woman in the top 10 experts in the world. After all, there was a similar age gap between them, and they were the only 2 women in the top 10 experts. It was inevitable that they would often be compared to each other. Ning Qing naturally didn't like it and subconsciously felt hostility toward the Empress. The 2 of them walked, picked, and played along the way. After going over another mountain, Li Yuanju straightened her body and turned her head to look. She felt a very strong aura rapidly approaching them. Her perception was considered very strong, but it couldn't cover a large range. She only sensed it when the other party was within a kilometer. "Senior sister, what's wrong?" Ning Qing asked curiously. "Someone is coming. It's an expert, but his aura is weak. He should be injured," Li Yuanju said without much expression. No matter who it was, she wouldn't be too concerned. It was just that Ning Qing was beside her, and it wouldn't be good if she didn't pay attention to the other party and Ning Qing got into a conflict. "An expert? Senior sister, he must be very powerful if you say he's an expert. He's even injured. Don't tell me it's Qi Zixiao?" Ning Qing laughed as she spoke. Although she wanted to see that famous woman, the world was so big. It would be too much of a coincidence if they could meet here. No matter how she thought about it, it was impossible. Li Yuanju remained silent. Soon, the 2 of them saw a Qilin beast carrying 2 people on its back. It suddenly stopped and stared at them cautiously. Li Yuanju raised her eyes and met the cold gaze of the person on the Qilin's back. She was right. How could it be such a coincidence? Li Yuanju was surprised. Ning Qing was a little curious when she saw the Qilin beast. Then, she looked at the Qilin and the man and woman on its back, especially the woman in red who was full of heroic spirit. Suddenly, a person that she had just mentioned flashed in her mind. She opened her mouth wide in surprise. Was she going to become an immortal? How could she be so accurate? "Qi Zixiao," Li Yuanju whispered. Although she had never met him, she could recognize him at a glance. After all, he was powerful, dressed in red, and riding a Qilin. It would be strange if she didn't know who he was. Li Yuanju, the Empress exuded a cold aura. She didn't expect to meet this famous woman here, and she couldn't help but feel that the other party was here to stop her. However, how could she retreat when she saw this woman who was as famous as herself, even if she was only left with 30% of her strength? She floated down from the Qilin and landed in front of him. Her body was as straight as a spear as she looked at the other party. Rinpoche looked at her posture and wondered what was going on. Did she meet an expert? Who was Li Yuanju? Since the Empress could recognize her at a glance, she couldn't be weak. He thought about it again and seemed to have heard this name before. He quickly tried to recall when he had heard it before. At this moment, Li Yuanju smiled and said in a calm and amiable tone, "I don't have any ill intentions. It's just a coincidence. This is fate between you and I. I have heard of you for a long time. Why don't we sit for a while?" "What do you mean?" The Empress asked coldly. "I just want to get to know you when I see you. I naturally won't stop you if you want to leave," Li Yuanju said with a smile. Her voice was neither fast nor slow, and it made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Rinpoche looked at the scene from behind and was sure that she was definitely an expert. She might even be one of the top 10 experts. Her attitude couldn't be faked. She treated him as an equal, and the Empress seemed to be afraid of her. At the thought of this, he suddenly remembered who she was. Li Yuanju, the third most powerful expert in the world. Wasn't she the one? He had heard someone mention her before, but he didn't take it to heart and didn't think about it for a while. Rinpoche was shocked when he realized the other party's identity. Even at her peak, the Empress might not be able to defeat her, let alone now that she only had 30% of her strength. Fortunately, she didn't show any ill intentions. However, the Empress was still standing there like a telephone pole. After all, she wasn't the type to be at loggerheads with you 1 minute and sit down to drink and chat merrily the next. However, she couldn't possibly keep standing like this, right? In any case, the other party had shown goodwill. It was better not to show hostility at this time and wait until she recovered. She immediately shouted, "We have meat. Do you have wine?" There was silence. Li Yuanju didn't expect that the man she didn't pay much attention to would speak at this time and even say such a thing. A gentle smile appeared on her delicate face. "We don't have wine, but we have qi. I picked it myself and will treat you to a meal." After a while, the four of them sat together. The Empress and Li Yuanju looked at each other and didn't speak. One was cold, while the other was gentle. They were two completely different people. However, when the two of them sat together, the wilderness made people feel like they were in a fairyland. Ning Qing looked at the Empress curiously and then at Rinpoche. She thought to herself, "So, Qi Zixiao is like this. She's indeed very beautiful. So this is the gigolo that she found. I really can't see what's so special about him." Rinpoche looked at the two of them looking at each other without speaking and felt a little bored. However, he didn't expect the third most powerful expert in the world to be so gentle. He always thought that the top 10 experts in the world were as domineering as the Empress. After all, an expert had to have the demeanor of an expert. The other girl, who was about 15 or 16 years old, looked at the Empress and then at him. She looked like she was looking at a rare animal, which made him feel a little awkward. "Senior sister is more beautiful," Ning Qing suddenly said after looking at her for a long time, breaking the silence in the field. Other than her, no one else would have seen these two peerless experts say such words when they were together. Li Yuanju looked apologetic, stretched out her lily-white hand, and gently patted Ning Qing's head twice, blaming her for talking nonsense. Rinpoche felt that the Empress's body and face became even colder. After thinking about it, he felt that the Empress and Li Yuanju were currently in a state of defeating you with their eyes. He had an obligation to help the Empress regain her dignity. However, it was hard to tell who was better in terms of appearance, as they were both different. In terms of martial arts, Li Yuanju was the third most powerful expert in the world, and the Empress didn't seem to have anything to be proud of. Rinpoche's eyes lit up as he looked at her. Zixiao has big breasts. Rinpoche killed her with a single blow. Li Yuanju was as beautiful as a fairy and had an otherworldly aura that made her seem like a fairy who had fallen into the mortal world by mistake. However, she had a flat chest, at least in his eyes. Not only her, but the person beside her was also like this. As a result, Rinpoche's words were extremely lethal. Ning Qing looked at the Empress's chest, looked at her senior, and then lowered her head to look at herself. Immediately, her face turned ugly. Even a lady like Li Yuanzhu had her otherworldly aura shattered by this sentence. She subconsciously glanced at the Empress, and her ears turned slightly red. Chapter 207. Rinpoche had stabbed both of them in the heart. It was a stab in the heart. Even Li Yuanzhu's calm demeanor was broken. She was embarrassed and annoyed, let alone Ning Qing. Her mouth was so red that a soy sauce bottle could be hung on it. She glared at him with extreme hatred and wished she could bite off a piece of meat. Rinpoche then acted as if nothing had happened. He took out a packet of spiced beef and said, "Do you want to try it? It's a specialty from my place and tastes pretty good." Li Yuanzhu didn't know what to do with such a person. She had a hard time when she was young. When she grew up, everyone treated her with respect. For 10 years, no one had treated her like this, giving her a red date after giving her a slap. Did he think she was a child? However, she really couldn't lose her temper. It seemed that she hadn't been angry for a long time. Although Rinpoche's words broke her calmness, it only made her feel a little embarrassed. At the same time, she found it a little funny. This person was really bold. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was extremely daring. He actually dared to say such words in front of Qi Zixiao. Although Qi Zixiao glared at him with a murderous look, she actually didn't lose her temper. This made her a little curious. After all, she had heard a lot about Qi Zixiao's temperament. This person was indeed as weak as the rumors said. His appearance could only be considered delicate and was far from handsome. Not only was Qi Zixiao willing to take risks for him, but she also tolerated him at this time. It was really strange. Li Yuanzhu really wanted to know why Qi Zixiao treated him like this. However, she was only curious. She had always been calm and impulsive, and she rarely paid too much attention to the outside world. In fact, she would probably forget about this matter after a few days, so naturally, she wouldn't ask. At this moment, the atmosphere was broken. She said, "I have long wanted to meet the famous Empress of Dayo, but Lan City is too far away. I didn't expect to have such an opportunity today. So what if I see her?" The Empress said coldly. She didn't have any thoughts about Li Yuanzhu. She didn't even hate her after seeing her, but she was still somewhat unconvinced. She was ranked 7th, and now she was ranked 5th. The other party was ranked 3rd. It was a pity that she only had 30% of her strength left. Otherwise, she would have given it a try. "Your reputation is well-deserved." Li Yuanzhu smiled gently. "Oomph." The Empress snorted. Ning Qing looked at Li Yuanzhu and then at the Empress, feeling displeased. "Senior sister is such a good person. Why do you keep snorting? Not to mention that you're seriously injured right now. Even if you were in perfect condition, you wouldn't be able to defeat Senior Sister." "Senior Sister is number 3 in the world," Ning Qing said proudly as she raised her head. "Li Yuanzhu is ranked 3rd in the world, and you're only ranked 7th. What's there to be arrogant about? Besides, you're seriously injured." It was a very simple and childish thought. After all, he was only 15 or 16 years old and had grown up in a Taoist temple. He did not know much about the ways of the world, and his personality was jumpy. Everyone in the monastery doted on her, and she did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. However, these words caused the Empress to become even colder. Her eyes were filled with battle intent. If not for her severe injuries, she would have started fighting immediately. "Sorry, she has a childish temperament." Li Yuanzhu apologized with a sincere look in her eyes. Then, he turned to look at Ning Qing. "Don't talk nonsense again, or I won't bring you out next time." However, his tone was not stern at all. Rinpoche pondered. He was still a child. His next sentence should be, "Don't ever let her off," right? What would they do when they grew up? What was the point of having the police? However, what she said was the truth. At most, he would be reprimanded for talking nonsense and making an unintentional mistake. However, this would be even more hurtful. Zixiao has big breasts. Rinpochian said with certainty. Rinpochian felt that he was Feng Qingyang now. His 9 swords beyond the swords were specialized in breaking all kinds of techniques. Nothing could cover up his mediocrity. Breasts. Things. 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 However, he also took advantage of Li Yuanju's good temper. She was obviously angry, but she still had to maintain her poise. Although such a person was number 3 in the world, he was easy to bully. If it was someone else, let alone number 3, even if he was number 10 in the world, Rinpochian might not dare to poke at their wounds. Ning Qing's face turned green. She had never hated someone so much in her life. If she could, she would bite him to death. The smile on Li Yuanju's face could no longer be maintained. It was not easy to get over the matter just now, but Rinpochian poked both of their chests again. For the first time, she felt that she hated this person a little. The Empress was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. Her ears were completely red, and she wanted to slap the guy beside her to death. However, when she saw the stiff smile on Li Yuanju's face, she immediately withdrew her coldness and smiled instead. When she withdrew her coldness and smiled like a flower, it was exceptionally captivating. This smile disappeared in a flash. After all, winning in this aspect wasn't something to be proud of. In her heart, strength was always the first priority. "You have seen enough. I'm leaving," the Empress said. She lifted Rinpochian's collar and landed on Qi Shui's back in a few flashes. She still had the attitude of a victor. The two of them stopped and sat with each other for a while. Rinpochian ruthlessly stabbed both of them in the heart. When they passed by, Qi Zixiao raised her hand and threw a bottle at them. Li Yuanju subconsciously caught it. Only when the Kirin was nowhere to be seen did Ning Qing scream hysterically. "That slut! How could Qi Zixiao be so blind as to fall for him? Senior, why didn't you slap him to death? He actually dared to compare you with Qi Zixiao." Li Yuanju shook her head slightly and was speechless. That guy was simply a jerk. She looked at the bottle in her hand. It was like white jade, and the fragrance of wine wafted out after unscrewing it. Was he treating her to a drink? Li Yuanju smiled at the thought of this. "Senior, why are you still smiling?" "I'm so pissed," Ning Qing said resentfully. After the two of them were far away, Rinpochian smiled and said, "Zixiao, I have avenged you. It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned this." Now that he mentioned it, the Empress was furious. Since when did she rely on this to suppress others? Also, what were his eyes looking at? She had really embarrassed herself today. Moreover, it was in front of Li Yuanju. Although she had already realized that this world didn't seem to care much about this, and there were always models wearing underwear on TV and bikinis on the beach, she still found it hard to accept. She really wanted to slap Rinpochian, but in the end, she couldn't do it. After holding back her anger for a long time and thinking about Li Yuanju's expression just now, she felt an inexplicable sense of pleasure and satisfaction. The two of them traveled for another day. When they crossed a mountain, they heard a series of battle cries. Both of them rode on Qi Shui and looked down from the mountain ridge. All they could see was chaos below. One of them was the Great Xiao army with a few thousand soldiers. The other side was leaping and launching a surprise attack towards the army. More than 100 figures charged towards the front of the army formation. The tens of people at the front braved the rain of arrows and leaped into the army formation. However, tens of figures also leaped out from the army formation and blocked them so that they wouldn't be disrupted by the attack. At this moment, the people at the back of the group leaped up and landed in the formation, setting off a rain of blood. This is the winged cavalry? The Empress took a closer look and recognized the identity of these people. After all, she couldn't be more familiar with the equipment of the winged cavalry. However, why were they here and even colliding with the Great Xiao army? At this moment, the formation of the Great Xiao army suddenly changed. Other than the soldiers that were entangled, the others formed a circle under the command of the winged cavalry and surrounded the group of more than 100 people and their opponents. Chapter 208. Die. One of the burly men laughed maniacally. The long saber in his hand pierced through the air and slashed at his opponent. Then, he brought the other saber in front of him. These two fellows cooperated well. Two advanced man-will experts were actually able to block a few of his moves, but that was as far as they could go. With a turn of his body, the long saber changed direction, and the head of the other opponent flew into the sky. Then, he shouted loudly and was about to split the opponent that he had just slashed into two when he was suddenly stopped by several spears from the side. The burly man had a look of contempt on his face. With a casual swing of his saber, the hands that were holding the spears immediately lost control, and the spears flew into the sky. However, those people didn't stop and immediately moved away. The people behind them continued to stab with their spears. This was the centipede formation used by Great Xia during the battle with the Aboriginals. The advantage of the Aboriginal warriors was too great. Even if the number of Great Xia soldiers was 10 times that of the Aboriginals, it would be difficult to achieve victory on the battlefield without relying on this battle formation. Needless to say, they were facing the elites of the Aboriginals, the winged cavalry. Although there were only slightly more than 100 of them, all of them were at the earthwheel level. Even 5,000 elite soldiers would find it difficult to resist them. The difference in strength was too great. Therefore, after the Great Xia generals arranged for dozens of people to block the first batch of Aboriginal warriors, they immediately launched the centipede formation and eliminated these 100 people. This kind of situation occurred in many places on the battlefield. After the winged cavalry warriors killed and repelled their opponents, they discovered that they had to face opponents that moved quickly and held spears that were like centipedes with hundreds of legs. A bunch of bastards. One of the winged cavalry warriors cut off all the spears around him like a spinning top. The long saber in his hand turned into a white line and cut off 5 or 6 heads. Suddenly, a spear pierced toward his waist at an extremely fast speed. The winged cavalry warrior grabbed the spear with one hand, making it difficult for his opponent to advance. Then, he flicked the spear upward, and his opponent quickly let go of his hands. This was the result of many years of combat experience. These people were all Great Xia captains who were at the beginner level of the man-wheel. They had fought with the Aboriginals more than once and were able to survive. Regardless of strength or reaction, they were much stronger than the rest. However, in the next second, he saw a flash of saber light in front of him in horror. His entire body was directly sent flying from his chest. If it was an ordinary Aboriginal warrior facing the centipede formation, it was very likely that he would be obstructed by the surrounding spear formations. However, he wasn't facing an ordinary Aboriginal warrior, but the elite winged cavalry. One of the soldiers chopped off a few more heads with a backhand. When his gaze swept across the surroundings, his body suddenly paused. A long spear had directly left a bloody mark under his armpit. The soldier chopped off the heads of the 2 people in front of him with a backhand. His face was filled with joy as he shouted, "Your Majesty." Upon hearing this sound, all the Aboriginal warriors revealed a look of joy and looked in the direction of the sound. Many of them didn't manage to dodge in time and ended up with a few wounds on their bodies. However, many people saw a red figure rushing towards them from afar. Who else could it be but His Majesty? "Your Majesty! We found Her Majesty." Everyone cheered excitedly, not forgetting to slash their opponents to death. A middle-aged general at the back of the Great Xia battle formation was originally frowning as he looked at the battlefield. Based on the current situation, even if these 5,000 elite soldiers could eliminate more than 100 winged cavalry warriors, they would at least lose 70% of their men. This was an optimistic estimate, and the possibility of both sides suffering losses was very high. It was a pity that there wasn't a crossbow battalion. If there was, this wouldn't have happened. One had to know that these were all battle-hardened elite soldiers. Although the merciful didn't command soldiers, his heart was bleeding. The only consolation was that these were, after all, the most elite winged cavalry warriors of Dayo. At least 1/10 of them were here, and even if these 5,000 elite soldiers were to be sacrificed, it wouldn't be considered a loss. At this moment, he heard the yells of the winged cavalry warriors in the battle formation. His facial expression changed drastically. Sitting on the back of his horse, he saw a red figure rushing in his direction. "Stop her!" the general shouted, but he was distressed. Why did Qi Zixiao appear at this time? He had already invested all his troops to surround these winged cavalry warriors. Together with Qi Zixiao, there was simply no way to stop them. He could only hope that Qi Zixiao was seriously injured as rumored. However, he didn't have any expectations as he looked at the figure that was rushing over from afar. Even if she was seriously injured, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Furthermore, looking at her current speed, she didn't look like she was injured at all. Half of the hundreds of winged cavalry warriors that surrounded him immediately turned their horses and rushed toward the red figure. The Empress's face was ice cold. Facing the 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors, she leaped into the air. Just like how she stepped on human skulls on Earth, it didn't matter if they dodged or brandished their sabers. To the Empress, there was practically no difference. In a single move, more than a dozen of the winged cavalry warriors fell from their horses. Before that happened, they were already dead. These 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors couldn't even stop her for half a step. When the remaining people turned their horses around, they could only see the back of the Empress charging in their direction. "Shoot!" The middle-aged general looked at the scene in front of him and trembled slightly. He forcefully controlled his voice and gave the order. He smiled bitterly. His 5,000 elite soldiers were entangled with the winged cavalry and couldn't move at all. Regardless of whether he retreated or not, he would still die. It's over, it's all over. At this moment, the only hope in his heart was that a few more people could escape and kill a few more winged cavalry warriors. The remaining people had already drawn their bows and knocked their arrows. Upon hearing the order, they immediately released their bows. 50 to 60 arrows pierced through the air and flew straight toward the lady in red. The Empress stretched out her hand and grabbed. 6 or 7 arrows appeared in her hand. As for the rest, she brushed them aside. With a flip of her hand, the 6 or 7 arrows flew back. 3 of them directly missed, 2 of them penetrated the horse's buttocks, and 1 of them was lucky enough to hit one of the winged cavalry warriors. Seeing this, the Empress's face turned even colder. After brushing aside the second round of arrows, she immediately appeared on a horse and smashed that man's head with one hand. Taking advantage of the situation, she pounced toward the general who was surrounded in the middle. Immediately, 3 figures on their horses soared into the sky. These 3 people actually had the strength of an earthwheel expert. However, they were smashed to the ground one after another. The Empress smashed that general's head with one palm. Carrying the corpse, she leaped out of the crowd and shouted, "The great Xia general is dead. Kill!" Her cold voice spread throughout the battlefield. "Kill!" The winged cavalry warriors laughed heartily and shouted. At this moment, the fatigue from the past few days couldn't be found on their bodies. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. "Avenge the general." This weak voice was immediately drowned out. However, that general's personal guard still had the determination to die and rushed toward the Empress with a sorrowful look on his face. After knowing that their general was dead, the morale of the great Xia soldiers plummeted. Coupled with the fact that there was no one to command them, they collapsed in no time and began to flee in all directions. "Your Majesty!" More than 10 winged cavalry warriors rushed to the Empress's side. Their faces were full of reverence. At this moment, the ground around her was already filled with corpses. "Kill them and come back in the time it takes to burn an incense stick," the Empress said coldly. "Yes." Other than a captain who remained by the Empress's side, the rest of the people broke into a run and chased after the great Xia soldiers who had scattered. Ren Baqian watched the bloody massacre of this era from the ridge and then saw the Empress charge alone. In particular, those shouts of "kill" made his blood boil. However, it was only blood boil. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.